If you haven't been living under a rock, I imagine you've heard of Katabasis by R.F. Kuang, R.F. Kuang's latest release that everyone is talking about, and I have been just as intrigued as everyone else. I heard the synopsis and thought, that sounds awesome. Despite the fact that I've had sort of mixed experiences with R.F. Kuang's work, I've read Babel and Yellowface, and both of them were 3-star reads for me. Great in some areas, not my favorite in others. Some mismatches, I would say, between R.F. Kuang's style and my own personal preferences as a reader. So I'm giving R.F. Kuang and myself, our reader-author relationship, another go, a third chance with Katabasis. And I'm excited because this sounds so up my alley, and I'm hoping this is the one, this is the time that I'll just have a fantastic, love it, exuberant, ebullient, overwhelmingly positive experience. But we'll find out together, as always. So buckle up and get ready and join me to read Katabasis by R.F. Kuang. Did they say raging boner in the 80s? That's not the kind of thing I really want in my search history, so you can let me know in the comments, but she didn't like being out in the open at night without at least 5 solid walls separating her and the things that wanted to eat her. 5 walls? Is that meant to mean 4 walls and a ceiling? But a ceiling isn't a wall. Is there a floor? Wouldn't that be 6 if you're counting all of the surfaces? Is she used to pentagonal rooms? Are there a lot of pentagonal rooms at Cambridge? I just have questions. And again, it's not a spoiler. You told us that in the first chapter. How are we still here? The character arcs in this book are dots. Okay, now she's literally just wandering aimlessly through a featureless void. I will read the blurb for you in case you're unfamiliar with the premise. If this is somehow the first time you're hearing about this new release, I don't know what areas of the internet you inhabit, but they must be very calm and peaceful. Dante's Inferno meets Susanna Clarke's Piranesi, one of my all-time favorites, in his all-new dark academia, which I love, fantasy, which I love, from R.F. Kuang, in which 2 graduate students must put aside their rivalry and journey to hell to save their professor's soul, perhaps at the cost of their own. Katabasis, noun, ancient Greek, the story of a hero's descent to the underworld. Alice Law has only ever had one goal, to become one of the brightest minds in the field of magic, capitalized and with a K at the end, because it's extra special magic, I guess. She has sacrificed everything to make that a reality. Her pride, her health, her love life, and most definitely her sanity. All to work with Professor Jacob Grimes at Cambridge, the greatest magician in the world. That is, until he dies in a magical accident that could possibly be her fault. Grimes is now in hell, and she's going in after him, because his recommendation is the key to her future, and he could hold her dreams in his now incorporeal hands. Unfortunately, her rival, Peter Murdoch, has come to the very same conclusion. With nothing but the records of Orpheus and Dante to guide them, bundles of chalk to draw the pentagrams necessary for their spells, and the burning desire to make all the academic trauma mean anything, they set off across hell to save a man they don't even like. But hell is not like the storybooks say. Magic isn't always the answer, and there's something in Alice and Peter's past that could forge them into the perfect allies or lead to their doom. Very dramatic. And I must admit, I'm a sucker for dark academia fantasy. What can I say? I think it would be fun to read the first line and react to that. Chapter 1, it starts with a quote from Plato. "For I deem that the true votary of philosophy is likely to be misunderstood by other men. They do not perceive that he is always pursuing death and dying, and if this be so, and he has had the desire of death all his life long, why when his time comes should he repine at what he has been always pursuing and desiring?" Interesting. Cambridge, Michaelmas term, October. Well, what a first line. That gave us absolutely nothing. Okay, let me read one more. "The wind bit, the sun hid, and on the first day of class, when she ought to have been lecturing undergraduates about the dangers of using the Cartesian severance spell to revise without pee breaks, Alice Law set out to rescue her advisor's soul from the 8 courts of hell." Okay, that has a very sort of conversational tone, which is not 100% what I was expecting. I'm not mad at it, it's just not what I expected. So we'll see if that continues throughout, but it seems like the prose is going to be quite straightforward, which is not my personal favorite preference-wise, especially when it comes to fantasy. I like a little bit more elevated language and prose. Didn't get a lot from that, to be honest. It's basically just the blurb restated in the first paragraph, but sure, why not? We can all be on the same page as we start the book. Not my favorite way to open. It was a little bit underwhelming for me personally, but I'll reserve judgment. I'll just finish the first chapter and we'll see what we see. And then I'll be back to share my initial thoughts and then we'll go from there. I am currently trapped by a cat, so I might just sit here for a while. We'll see. I might need you to vacate, my sweet darling. You don't want to. I can tell in your countenance that you don't want to. Can I put you over my shoulder? Oh, thank you. I'm trying to keep her. Hello, friends. I have read the first chapter of Katabasis, and I have thoughts, okay? I use so many tabs in just one chapter. I don't even know. 20 tabs in the first chapter. Where do I start with this? Okay, I'm feeling a little worried is where I'll start. Like I already said, I find it kind of odd that the first chapter is just reiterating the blurb, sort of telling us the premise up front. I feel like Babel was written in a little bit more of a heightened prose. This feels very simplistic and straightforward. Oh my God, I have so many notes. Like, look, this is the second page. The entire margin is full. The first thing that jumped out at me is that in this book, in this world, I guess magic has a K on the end, which it's so minor, but it irks me. Like, if you really want it to seem different, then come up with a different word for it. But when authors just change the spelling, if it's magic with a K or magic with a Y, that's not actually world building. Then every time I read it, I think that's not how you spell that word. And it's just, why? Why? I don't know. Then I just start to question why magician is still spelled the same as it is in our world where magic just has a C. Wouldn't it have a K in there? But then it would be pronounced differently. But then I just think, okay, if you wanted to use magician the normal way, why not just spell magic the normal way too? You know? I don't know. And then we get into a paragraph where she's talking about all these existing sources of people who have gone to hell, and then bringing up people like Dante, bringing up T.S. Eliot. So implying, I guess, that their fictional works were actually nonfiction. Our literary canon is the same, or at least similar enough to have these authors and their works in the form that they exist in our real life world. The only difference is that they're based in reality, in which case, I don't know, that to me not only feels lazy and like a shorthand to world build, but also feels like a cop-out, because I'm thinking to myself, if we actually lived in a world where magic was real and we all knew magic was real and hell was real and we all knew hell was real and that people had gone to hell and come back, our literature would be very different. It would have to be, right? So anyway, not my favorite. And then she also implies that Orpheus was a real person. If Orpheus is real, I have a whole lot of other questions that come up about that and what that means for this world that are not being addressed so far. There's also some lines that feel weirdly repetitive. So for example, this one, her progress review loomed at the end of the term, and without a living and breathing advisor, the best Alice could hope for was an extension of funding sufficient to last until she transferred elsewhere and found a new advisor. For some reason, that feels really clunky to me, using advisor at the end of the first part of the sentence and then using it again at the end. I feel like there are multiple ways that sentence could have been structured to not use advisor twice in such a short period of time. Again, maybe I'm being nitpicky, but these are the kinds of things that I notice. And it's the kind of thing that I expect authors to revise at some point in their process, but also an editor to flag and say, hey, this might jump out to readers to reuse this word twice in the sentence. Maybe we could use either a synonym or just structure it so that we don't have to say it twice. That's just adding to my impression in this first chapter that the writing feels very repetitive, not only on a word by word sort of sentence basis, but also conceptually repetitive, which I'll get to in a second, and just under edited, I guess. I don't know how long this book was in production, but it feels so far in the first chapter like it could have used a little bit more time with an editor, which is something that I feel, that's not just a criticism of R.F. Kuang. That's something I feel about 99% of the books that I've been reading that have been published in the last year or two. It just feels like editing is dying a slow death, or actually a quick death in publishing, which is really too bad. It's very glaring to me in this first chapter. But she says near the beginning that it was probably her fault, possibly her fault. Oh yeah, here. It was a terrible, gruesome accident that killed Professor Jacob Grimes, and from a certain point of view, it was her fault. So we get that on page 1. And then on page 9, still in the first chapter, we get the dreadful tragic death of Professor Jacob Grimes had been both foreseeable and avoidable. It was also, unknown to most, entirely Alice's fault, which not only is oddly repetitive and kind of unnecessary because we already got this information, but also we went from it being her fault from a certain point of view to it being her fault entirely, which feels like it's kind of contradicting itself. And maybe it's meant to be Alice wavering on her culpability. Maybe she's dealing with too much guilt and she's trying to justify it not maybe being her fault, but it's not in the first person. So it feels like the separate narrator is contradicting themselves, which is odd to me. And also just, again, feels very repetitive. So when she drew the pentagrams, she did not close the requisite loops. With pentagrams, it was very important to close the requisite loops. Like, okay, I could have inferred that from the first sentence, but sure, tell me again. Then we get an entire paragraph where it's basically just reiterating in a little bit more detail why you have to close the requisite loops, which is fine, I guess, but it just felt like a paragraph that kept reiterating the same thing over and over and over again. And it could have just said, you need to close the loops in magic. Just felt like we were, ironically, stuck in a loop in this particular paragraph. But also the first chapter in general, I think I wrote as a note somewhere that I felt like the book was edging me because we're just moving 2 steps forward and then 3 steps back, and then a step forward and then a step back, and then 2 steps forward and then 5 steps back. And it just keeps almost taking off and then going back, stating something we've already learned in a slightly different way. And it's only the first chapter, but I was feeling so on the edge of my seat waiting for anything to move forward, and then just to keep being reined back just felt very frustrating, to say the least. We're also setting up the what's soon to be arrivals to lovers dynamic, which I feel was sort of heavily promoted for this book. I feel like everything I heard about this book included the fact that there was a rivals to lovers arc, and it does feel very tropey in this first chapter, the way the characters are introduced and their history together and their dynamic. There's a description of him, and then Alice couldn't stand him. And I'm like, not for long, because it's very obvious, even if I didn't already know that it was meant to be rivals to lovers, if they're gonna not hate each other anymore by the end, even if they didn't get together romantically. I also found it baffling. Again, this is the first chapter, so I'm not counting any of this as spoilers. I'm just gonna say stuff that happens because it's the first chapter. But they're going to hell, right? There's a price to go to hell, and apparently the price is literally half of your remaining lifespan, which is absolutely mind-boggling that she doesn't even think twice about that. She's like, yep, that's fine. 30 or so years of my lifespan gone. And then she goes on to be kind of concerningly ageist, and also a little concerning in general in terms of her priorities, because she goes on to say that she would easily sacrifice her firstborn for a professorial post or sever a limb. And maybe she's exaggerating, but also she's willing to lose 30 years of her lifespan to get her advisor back. So I'm not sure what to think of Alice in this first chapter. She definitely comes across very single-minded, a little intense. A little might be an understatement. Very intense, and also very pretentious, which maybe is to be expected. The narrator, or Alice, contradicting herself, we learn on page 13 that she had trained her entire life to do this one thing, and if she could not do it, then she had no reason to live. But then later, we throw back in time to when she first got to Cambridge and the first example of magic she saw in one of her first classes. And then it says all the fields she had considered for her major, maths, physics, medicine, history, they all fell away. They seemed so irrelevant. For why would you just study static truths when the truth had just exited left? Which is fair, but then I wrote a note and was also confused because I thought, well, okay, 3 pages ago, you told us that you had studied magic your whole life. It was all you ever wanted to do. If you couldn't do magic, you didn't want to live. But then here you're saying that you only decided to study magic at Cambridge once you were already at Cambridge and you were originally planning on studying math or physics or medicine. So which is it then? And it's not like an unreliable narrator where it's kind of part of the fun to not 100% know what's happening. This just feels like the book itself is not internally consistent, which is a huge pet peeve of mine. We also have a lot of anachronisms coming up. It just feels very modern, and I don't actually know if we have a date of when this is supposed to take place, and maybe it is supposed to be modern. I actually don't know. So far, I don't think we've heard of any technology that is too advanced. She talks about having flashlights. Okay, so they have flashlights. Maybe it is meant to be modern. Not sure. She's reminiscing, or this is talking about her first class where she's faced with magic. And the professor, or maybe this is the narrator, I can't remember, says, "Come on, you know very well what a heap is. You know it when you see it. It's like porn." Which just stuck out like a sore thumb to me. It's like porn. First of all, it feels like there are lots of things you could use as an example there other than porn, but also for some reason using the word porn feels so out of place here. Maybe pornography would have landed better, I don't know, but it just feels like an odd comparison to make to me, you know? There's a lot of talk about how superior Cambridge is to literally every other institution. Yeah, it is excessive. Apparently magic is misogynistic because it likes male voices better, so that's going to be really fun. Also, the fact that Alice not only is incredibly pretentious and also seemingly a bit confused about whether she's wanted to study magic her whole life or only since she was college age. But also, as we learn, she's either responsible for her professor's bloody, probably painful death from a certain point of view, or certainly, either way, it's her fault. And when he died, she covered up her involvement and didn't tell anyone and waited for someone to discover the body. I've enjoyed protagonists who were murderous in the past, so it's not necessarily a barrier to entry, but I just find the way she handled it quite cowardly, I guess, and unethical. So that just, is another thing to keep in mind about this protagonist, I guess. But that's the first chapter. Like I said, I'm not sure how to feel. I feel pretty conflicted. I think my biggest issue right now is the repetitiveness and the lack of internal consistency, because we're getting these same ideas over and over again, but then they're told in a different way every time. And maybe, to give R.F. Kuang credit, basically all we know about magic so far is that it works by lying about the state of reality and having to believe it enough for it to actually change reality for a moment. So maybe the lack of internal consistency is actually meant to mirror how magic works, and we're meant to not be able to know it's real because Alice and the story itself is constantly lying. Maybe, but I feel like maybe I'm giving the book too much credit by saying that. I don't know. But it is definitely hard to know if I can trust anything I'm being told when it gets brought up again 2 pages later and then it's talked about in a completely different way. Anyway, I'm going to stop because I've been talking for almost 30 minutes and it's just the first chapter. So I have a problem. I'm going to go read to the 25% mark. I really want to love this book, okay? I love the premise so much. I want to have a great time with it. So I'm really hoping that this is just an awkward start and will take off from here and everything will be great. Okay, wish me luck. I'll be back soon. I have some thoughts. The things I said in the first chapter continue to be things that I'm noticing. I will say, though, before I get into my nitpicky criticism type comments on the first 25%, I do feel that some of them have fallen away a bit and the pacing has really picked up and things are flowing more smoothly from, I would say, around the 20% mark. So keep that in mind. A lot of fantasy have very info dumpy, sometimes slightly clunky intros, and then as the world is built and we understand what's going on a little bit more, especially if there's magic, things kind of chill out a little bit and are much more smooth. So maybe that's the case here, but there are some things that I've been struggling with this, and a lot of them are things that I brought up in the first chapter impressions, my first chapter reaction. There is a lot of repetition. There's a lot of internal inconsistency and contradicting itself, and I am finding the main character deeply unlikable. So I'm struggling a bit with that. But there's also just a few moments and a few characterization choices that feel like they're made more for convenience sake than actually making any sense. For example, at one point, Peter, who is Alice's fellow grad student, talks about how he was impressed that she brought up the historical context, taking into account when the author of a reference work lived and what their life would have been like, to better understand how to apply the things they wrote about and whether it's still relevant. And he was impressed and told her that he'd never thought to take into account historical context in his references, which, what? Even if your focus is mathematics, how could you possibly not be taught in university, even in an undergrad, let alone at a graduate level, to take historical context of your references into account? That's like basic academia. What? I was so confused by that. Anyway, there's a couple moments like that where I just think, really? Okay, that doesn't make any sense, but sure, I'll go with it for now. No, you're right, Peter nodded thoughtfully. I've never thought about texts like this before. What, in terms of close reading? I just mean, I don't know, taking into account when they were written and the author's social context and such. Historicization, Murdoch, that's what we call it. What, do you just take everything you read at face value? I mean, if the math checks out, unbelievable. This is why everyone hates logicians. But then again, how in the world would you get through undergrad and into a graduate degree without ever taking into account the time period in which the people they're referencing were writing their work? Like, even for math, if someone had a theory about math from the 12th century that has now been debunked and reworked a million times by more modern mathematicians, you might go back to it out of curiosity, but I imagine most mathematicians wouldn't treat it with the same validity and importance as more modern math that takes into account all of the advancements from the centuries after that point. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. If you're a mathematician, I must say I am the furthest thing from a mathematician, but I just don't get it. I do also find it funny that Alice is a linguist, because Babel, of course, was very focused on academics, specifically tying magic to languages. And we're getting, while it's a different magic system and it's not based on languages specifically, we are getting someone who focuses on linguistics, who is a magician, again, in this book. I also struggled for almost the entire first quarter with when this was actually supposed to be taking place. I'm pretty sure now that we're sitting around maybe the 70s, 80s, 90s, but I'm only starting to guess that based on a few references we've gotten to the outside world and to things like starting to increase accessibility to personal computers. There was very much a sense of floating in a featureless void with very little context about the outside world in the first portion. And for a while, I thought we were in a similar setting to Babel. And it seems to be much more modern than that, which explains some of the anachronisms that are not actually anachronisms, but I thought might have been when I wasn't sure what time period it took place in. But it also feels a little bit like an odd choice to set this in the 70s or 80s. Not that you can't, but it doesn't feel very clear. And then that makes me wonder why that choice was made and why it isn't obvious, especially because all those decades have very strong aesthetics and personalities, and there's very little description of the world. The only literary references so far are much older literary references. There's nothing of modern culture really coming into it so far. So I don't know. I find that a bit odd. And just personally, as someone who reads a lot of speculative fiction, I prefer when the world building is very elaborate and upfront, and you can really establish yourself in a time and place and also visualize the world and really settle in. And I don't feel like I've been able to do that so far, in part because most of the book has taken place in hell, but also in part because it feels very separate from the world, as if the world doesn't matter and the time period doesn't matter, which is just not my personal preference, I would say. I'm also not totally vibing with the tone so far. This feels much more quirky and quippy than anything I've read from R.F. Kuang before. It almost feels like it's trying to emulate the YA romantasy, quippy comebacks, badass heroine who always has the last laugh sort of vibe. And I find that it's not my personal preference, and it feels odd to me because I don't associate R.F. Kuang with that style of writing. For one of them had to keep the cheer. One of them had to be delusional. This was the key to flourishing in grad school. You could do anything if you were delusional. Okay. Couldn't you just say, for one of them had to keep the cheer, one of them had to be delusional. This was the key to flourishing in grad school. Or you could phrase it as, for one of them had to keep the cheer. This was the key to flourishing in grad school. You could do anything if you were delusional. Again, gets the same idea across. I'm just finding it a little bit irksome, okay? It just feels like with a little bit more work, one more pass from an editor, a little rearranging, we could say the same thing a little bit more efficiently with less repetition. And there's just so much repetition in both the larger ideas, but also specific phrases and concepts, specific words that's coming up in the first quarter of this book that I am really running out of patience for the repetition, and I'm just needing it to be a little bit more efficient. I'm not saying that literature has to, state something once and then move on and never, touch on that concept again for fear of being repetitive, but there is a middle ground. At least for me personally. This is all my personal opinion. Okay. Oh yeah, here's an example of this quirky, quippy sort of writing style that I'm finding quite jarring for some reason. Our particular encounters with that wood are fleeting in the long span of its existence. It all seemed very obvious to Alice when Peter explained it. I should have thought of that. So your plaque might have put us in the proximity of every carpenter who's ever lived. I see. Or hiking enthusiast. Fair enough. Or even tree enthusiast. What's your point, Murdoch? 3 examples that become more absurd and just the short, punchy dialogue back and forth, and it's just clearly played for laughs. Maybe just it doesn't feel quite natural, or it's just not at all what I expected from R.F. Kuang or my experience of her writing in the past, that I'm finding it hard to adjust to. Oh yeah, on a positive note, there is a cat in this, and I do like cats, so that's a check in the pro column for me. Also, it does seem so far that primarily this is exploring the self-delusion required to get through the ridiculous, intense, stressful, possibly even abusive, depending on your perspective, experience of grad school. And I've never been to grad school, so I can't tell you, but I did find theater school my college experience incredibly traumatizing. So I'm not saying she's wrong in positing that post-secondary is hell on earth. Could definitely be, depending on your perspective. I am finding some of the asides that are continually bringing up this idea that Alice is well equipped to handle hell because she's already a grad student. Very repetitive because it's just being worded in essentially exactly the same way over and over and over again. I guess that's just literally the definition of it being repetitive, but I'm wanting either to go deeper or to explore other aspects of it, or at least to just phrase it in a different way, or just not have to outright say it so often. It's already been established that that's kind of a theme and a connection, perhaps a metaphor that's going on here, so I don't necessarily need to be reminded of it every chapter. It also seems like we might be eventually exploring what it means to be ourselves, what gives us our identity, if we have a soul, what that soul might be, and whether it's tied to our memories and our experiences or something else, or a combination of things, which is interesting, depending on how we examine that moving forward. Speaking of repetition, I'm finding the character development, or specifically the relationship development, frustrating for the same reason. You continue to have this pattern of they act familiar, pull away, and then Alice remembers or reflects on how sad it is or how weird it feels to have those moments of closeness when they're not close like that anymore. And I'm just starting to feel like, okay, we get it. We understand that they used to be close and now they aren't. I assume at some point we'll find out why they had a falling out, but you don't have to remind us every time they interact. You could just have them have that moment of familiarity and then kind of pull away. And we could be like, oh shit, yeah, they're in proximity. They keep falling into old patterns, but it's weird now. I wonder when we'll find out why it's weird without having to have Alice point it out to us in her mind over and over again, There are also some weird word choices, as I said. I think in the first chapter reaction, I talked about the choice of using porn as a comparison to magic they were talking about. But also there's a moment where She talks about, or is thinking about, every department in the field having a raging boner for Murdoch. Feels like a weird choice, especially because at this point, I still had no idea what time period this was taking place in, and I couldn't tell if comments like that were gross anachronisms. Gross meaning like extreme anachronisms, not gross as in like disgusting, although also kind of gross. Turns out if this is taking place in the 80s-ish, then maybe that's just contemporary language. Although, did they say raging boner in the 80s? That's not the kind of thing I really want in my search history, so you can let me know in the comments. But, oh yes, this is when we discovered that she, too, was a linguist. But is she a cunning linguist? That is the true question. We are also seemingly touching somewhat, on some level, on misogyny within academia, at least in this time period. I'd say it's been pretty surface level so far, but I imagine that might come up more as it goes on. I do have a theory about why she and her advisor had a little bit of a falling out and why their relationship became more tense at the end there, which I'll save for a little spoiler moment, just in case I'm right. That, I suppose, would maybe tie into this larger theme of women being treated differently in academia, their experience being very different than men, potentially. But I could be wrong about that. The experience of being a woman in academia and misogyny in academia might be a theme that's going to emerge more as the text continues. One of the many reasons why I'm struggling with connecting to Alice is that she also seems to have a cruelty streak, but also a internal misogyny streak. And she is very judgmental of her fellow women, of which there are very few in her program. So that's a little unfortunate. Not my favorite thing ever to read about a female protagonist who is dealing with, at least so far, unchecked internalized misogyny. Alice herself is just a little bit, I already mentioned in my initial reaction, she's a little bit hard to like. She's testy, she's competitive, she's a little mean, she is a little ruthless. Not sure how I feel about her moral, ethical code at this point, but we'll see. Things like this. This is how she describes herself. The idea of working with someone dangerous excited her. Alice had dazzled her way through years of higher education by being a teacher's pet, by miraculously succeeding where others had failed. She relished the thought that her advisor might be harsh, impatient, even cruel to others, for that made his attentions to her worth all the more. She liked being the exception to the rule. Favoritism was well and fine if she was the favorite. Not the most likable trait to have in a person. Also, this is random, but I just saw my note on it because I was so confused. Alice is thinking about how she had always struggled to sleep while camping. And as part of this, she thinks she didn't like being out in the open at night without at least 5 solid walls separating her and the things that wanted to eat her. 5 walls? Is that meant to mean 4 walls and a ceiling? But a ceiling isn't a wall. Is there a floor? Wouldn't that be 6 if you're counting all of the surfaces? Is she used to pentagonal rooms? Are there a lot of pentagonal rooms at Cambridge? I just have questions. Also, there are giant diagrams in here and I have no idea why. Why? First of all, I don't remember if I complained about this in the first chapter reaction, but the text is huge. Why is the text so big? I don't know. I hate it. I like small text in the books that I'm reading. Also, why is this diagram more than half the page? It doesn't have to be that big. But then also, on the next page, we get more diagrams, which are basically saying the same thing. Why do we need this diagram? This diagram is useless, okay? So many diagrams, too many diagrams, and they're way too big, okay? Wasting space, wasting paper, save the trees. There's also quite a bit of back and forth discussion of hyperbolic space and geometry and the math that explains where they could go in hell and how it's like coral and things can look close, but they're actually really far away. And some of it feels a little bit like technobabble, which isn't an issue necessarily, but I am finding myself zoning out in those parts, especially because I'm not even sure if any of it is based on real math and real theories or if it's just made up, but it also goes on for so long. And Alice in her own internal monologue is thinking, all this is going over my head, I don't care. And it's hard as a reader to be invested when she's not even invested enough to listen to what Peter has to say. Oh yeah, also we get, should not get to wander willy-nilly. And then you couldn't just decide you didn't like being punished and nope back out into limbo. Just all of these, again, seemingly anachronisms that apparently are explained by it being in the 80s. But again, did people nope out of things in the 80s? That feels like a more modern saying. Correct me if I'm wrong. There's also this theory of reincarnation where basically in this world, it seems like everyone has now agreed that reincarnation is definitely what happens. And they don't know for sure because none of them can remember their past lives, and most of them have never been to hell or talked to anyone to, confirm that reincarnation is real. But they've all decided that it's the only thing that makes sense. And this is what they said: "We have reason to believe that time stretches infinitely into the past and into the future. If time is infinite, the probability that our singular lifetime happens at this very moment, at this very speck on the line, vanishes toward zero. So either time is finite, or we live more lives than one." Like, sorry, no, that is a very big logical leap to say that just because the probability is low. Also, probability of what? What are you comparing to? We have a data set of one, so how can you have it? Anyway, again, not a mathematician, was never particularly good at probabilities, but just because a probability is small doesn't mean impossible. Feel free to explain to me if I'm missing something obvious here, but I just find that to be ridiculous to say that time is infinite, or we believe time to be infinite. And if time is infinite, then time is such a huge span that our existence on it is so teeny tiny that the probability of us existing in this time is teeny, teeny, tiny, so tiny, in fact, that it's almost zero. Therefore, one of these two things must be true. Time is finite, or we live more lives than one. I refuse. No, I don't accept that conclusion. No. That does not follow the idea that time is infinite, okay? Just because my lifetime is very short in comparison to infinity, and I could have never existed at all or existed at any possible time in history, but I exist now, doesn't mean that then means that either time is much shorter to make that make sense, or that I must have lived many, many lives and am basically always existing. What? Again, maybe I'm missing something obvious, but that just, again, seems like a huge logical leap, and one does not follow the other for me whatsoever. So sorry. I get that this is a fictional world. Maybe I'm nitpicking too far, but I just found that so silly that it was stated like that, as if it was so obvious, and those were the only two possible conclusions to draw. Anyways. Also, we have a mismatch between the name of something and the actual thing, which again made me think very much of Babel and this idea of mismatch or a slight incongruity between two words in different languages that are meant to mean the same thing. And that's where the magic comes from, especially because on the last page, we referenced the Library of Babel. It feels like a callback to her previous work. I don't necessarily feel any particular way about that. I just noticed it. So I'm telling you. Like I mentioned, in the last 5% or so, I did find that things started to roll along a little more smoothly, and I was enjoying myself a little bit more, finding myself being distracted by word choices and repetition a little bit less. I did find the opening of, what chapter is this? Chapter 7, quite beautiful, describing the river Lethe. We also get into sort of describing the river and different perspectives on the river in different parts of the world, the different names for it, and ideas of how it functions within hell, which I found really interesting. And there's some references to the idea of never being able to step in the same river twice, because both a river and you are constantly changing. And then it goes on to say, the continuity of one's soul was tied inextricably to the persistence of one's memories. When memories were gone, a new soul was born. The Lethe was forgetting, was death, was change, which made me think of Octavia E. Butler, God is Change. One of my favorite books, Parable of the Sower. But this kind of whole chapter with the Lethe was probably my favorite of the book, I would say. My favorite so far. It also felt a little bit more played straight, a little less quirky and quippy and comedic, and more earnest and vulnerable, I would say. I also would say that most of the prose is pretty simple and straightforward, but this Lethe chapter, chapter 7, has a few really lovely moments of prose that are quite rhythmic and lyrical that I enjoy, which also kind of mirrors the idea of a river and that sort of flow, which is nice from a stylistic perspective, I suppose. There are these sort of regular academic interludes that are basically info dumping vehicles. I don't necessarily have any strong opinions about them. I think they're fine. So far, they work okay for me. I think the only thing I don't love about how they're being executed is that they kind of stray from general world and magic system knowledge to occasionally giving us a look into Alice's inner world, which feels odd for these chapters that feel like they're sort of from a third party perspective, unlike the regular chapters, which technically are in third person, but feel more aware of Alice's thoughts in the main narrative in a way that we aren't in these sort of academic paper excerpts, except when we are, which feels a little inconsistent. We also are getting a lot of repetition about the idea that magic comes from self-delusion, or the difference between the truth and a lie, or just making yourself believe a lie enough that you can make it reality for a moment. That has come up many times. And at this point, I'm starting to get frustrated because we get it. Move on already. We understand that that's how magic works. And again, it ties in once again with this idea of having to be delusional to make magic work, but also having to be delusional to make it through academia, and also having to be a little delusional to survive hell. It's just very repetitive. As you might tell, because I'm getting very repetitive in the way I'm talking about it, because there's only so many things to talk about because we're covering the same ground over and over again. And I'm getting frustrated, and I just want the plot to move forward and the character development to move forward and the ideas to move forward and for the themes to be explored from any other angle or maybe a little deeper, anything other than spinning our wheels, which is what it feels like we're doing. Like I said, the last chapter or two started to pick up a little bit, so I'm hopeful that that will continue, and I really am trying to maintain a sense of optimism about where we're going, but I must admit I'm getting frustrated. Spoilers now, in that this might be true, and if it's true, it will spoil something that will be revealed later in the book than 25%, but I could be wrong, so tread carefully, continue at your own risk, use the chapters if you want to skip this. Okay. My theory, and based on a few seemingly to me not that subtle hints, although maybe it will be some sort of a redirection or a red herring, but seems to me like Professor Grimes either sexually assaulted Alice at some point or attempted to come on to her romantically or sexually, and that is why they had this falling out and she became much more uncomfortable around him, tense around him, stressed around him, and he became colder around her if she rejected him or was upset about the potential assault. Especially in the chapter with the river Lethe, when she's drawn to it and she's thinking about wanting to forget everything and how much easier it would be if she could just forget. And there are little flashes of memory. It seems like she's remembering an assault, and it does seem tied to Grimes and also tied to this idea that Peter keeps asking her what she thinks his main sin is or what his worst sin is, so they could kind of go to the end point and wait for him. And she is very hesitant to speculate. And I wonder if that's because she knows that he has done some pretty terrible things and has experienced them firsthand. So that's my theory. I kind of hope I'm wrong for a bunch of different reasons, but that is definitely the impression I'm getting. I guess we'll find out. That's my theory. But that's it for spoilers. I just wanted to share that theory. I am not going to do more spoilers because we're only 25% of the way through the book and I've been talking for almost an hour. So I'm going to stop here. I'm going to go read to the halfway point. I'm going to put this down because it's heavy. See you soon. Hello, friends. I am now 50% of the way through Katabasis, and honestly, very little has happened so far. It's kind of mind-boggling, actually, that we entered hell in the first chapter, and now we are, at the end of chapter 17, and they've only made it through a couple courts, and we have only just figured out what their falling out was about, except we still don't know. We only know Alice's side of the story of how their falling out happened. Clearly, there's going to be some kind of reveal on Peter's end that we haven't heard yet, and I just feel like everything is being dragged out, and I'm not sure why. I'm not on board with Alice as a protagonist still. I feel like every chapter that goes by, I start liking her less and less. She's just kind of the worst on so many levels. Many of the same levels that I talked about in the first quarter, so I'm not sure it's really worth rehashing. I would not want to be friends with her, which is too bad because the last chapter I read, chapter 17, probably my favorite chapter of the whole book. And in that chapter, Alice finally has a moment. I feel like that was really her first moment of true vulnerability and an earnestness that made her feel like someone that I could connect to, could root for, could care about. Maybe that's a kernel of change for her. And the second half of the book, we're going to have a huge character growth change. I would love that, honestly, because I am struggling with her so much. But this last chapter was so much about her love of academia and why she loves it and how much she loves ideas and how she just wants to be in a place where she belongs, where she isn't weird for thinking deeply and caring deeply about thoughts and ideas and wanting to dive into them and being so unabashedly excited and giddy about new ideas and the silliness and the playfulness of discovery. And I love that. I can so relate to that. And I really would love for that to be the direction that Alice goes, for her to kind of reconnect to that childlike wonder of discovery, that joy of learning and of camaraderie instead of competition with her fellow academics, with her colleagues. And maybe that's going to tie in with the larger themes around, criticism of the system of academia and the way that it encourages and fosters competition between colleagues instead of collaboration. I have seen some people criticize this for being too academic and being too much about R.F. Kuang trying to prove that she's well-read or something. First of all, I don't think this reads like a textbook at all. I don't really get that criticism. Yeah, there's theories and references to things, and it's about academia, and they are academics, so the way they talk about ideas is the way academics talk about ideas, which I expected that going into it, and I don't mind that at all. But the book itself doesn't read like a textbook, so I don't really get that as a criticism. I also don't feel like R.F. Kuang is unnecessarily name-dropping authors and ideas. I mean, she brings them up when they're relevant to the discussion, and often it's characters bringing them up in the way that an academic probably would name drop various philosophers and academics in conversation. It feels very genuine to these characters and to the setting and the story, and I really see no issue with it. I do sort of wonder, for the people who have those critiques of this, why they picked this up in the first place, because it feels very much like it would not be their cup of tea if they read the blurb. I mean, of course, different people are going to react to a text differently and have different impressions of it. And if this read like a textbook to you, that's fair. I do want to read the textbooks that you've been reading, though, if they read like this, because I've never read a textbook that was like this, but maybe that's just me. I would say it's picking up a little bit. There's a bit more of an adventure element now. Feels like there are more stakes, but still definitely doesn't feel nearly as dangerous as I would expect a journey through hell to be, and still very slow paced and not a lot happening considering, again, they're in hell and we're halfway through the book. But anyway, this probably should have been obvious to me as soon as I started the book, but it occurred to me as I got into the next section of reading that the characters are named Alice and Peter, and that there must be something there to, characters who are drawn into, pulled into a completely unfamiliar world, and they're, a fish out of water and must find their way home, allusions to past literature, which definitely feels fitting for this book, I would say. I do want to bring up at this point, because it starts to become more and more prevalent in this part of the book, that Alice has an eating disorder, and she talks about it not constantly, but regularly enough, okay? And especially if you were actively dealing with an eating disorder right now, I wouldn't recommend reading this. I found it a little bit triggering, and I am a decade into recovery. There's a lot of talk of how it feels to restrict, those physical and mental sensations of restriction, but it's very much talked about in a moralistic, rising above your basest human needs to exist as solely a mind by not eating sort of thing. There's quite a few quotes, which I'm not going to read because I found them triggering to read, so I don't want to read them here in case they're triggering to you. And then nearing the end of this first half, we meet another character who seems to have also had a similar restrictive eating disorder. And there are some troubling implications with that are hard to talk about outside of spoilers. So I guess I should probably do a spoiler section at the end of this to discuss that. But just keep that in mind. If you at all think you could be triggered by this, really glorifying talk about restriction, I would avoid this one. I mean, I don't personally love so far how it's being discussed, and I do hope that there is some sort of reckoning or coming to terms for Alice that this is in fact an eating disorder and not actually her transcending her base needs, that we actually do have to eat. We are in fact human, and that restricting what you eat is not healthy and not a good way to take care of yourself, because you do actually have to fuel your body and your mind to be able to think, because don't forget that your brain uses a huge amount of energy and you cannot think to your highest capability if you are under feeding yourself, because spoiler alert, your brain needs energy. Your brain needs food. So I'm hoping that she will come to some sort of realization about that, and that the narrative won't leave it as this glorified way to be above the rabble and, rise above as an intellectual creature. I just find it a little unsettling so far. There's definitely a lot of judgment from Alice, especially for the people in hell and their vices, especially in Desire. The whole chapter in Desire is just Alice kink shaming everyone. It can feel very off-putting to be faced with someone else's kink when that is not your kink. I do find that, again, her perspective on sex seems to fall into the same category as any base human need, including food. The way she talks about her restrictive eating disorder kind of mirrors the way that she thinks about and talks about sex. And that whole Desire chapter really brought that to the fore for me, where I was just thinking, Alice has an issue with being a human being and having needs. I hope she works through that as this book goes on. She seems to want to have sex or enjoy sex, but she talks about it as though the type of pleasure she gets from sex is somehow superior to the kind of pleasure other people get from sex. And I'm not sure what that distinction is. I don't think she knows what the distinction is, other than she wants to be less base than other people. She keeps calling the sex that she's seen in Desire pathetic and gross and vulgar. And it's really funny. She's distinguishing it from the simple pleasure, which is what she gets from sex. She has pure intellectual sex, not base bodily sex, because there's a distinction there. She also has a lot of internalized misogyny to work through, which we already talked about, I believe, in the first quarter. Definitely continues in the second, especially toward her fellow female academics, which is interesting because there is at one point, I don't remember, I think it's more recent, I'm sure I'll get to it in a minute, but there's a passage where she talks about a memory she has of Peter and another male colleague joking about her, and she interprets what they've said to be sexist. And she talks about how that could have, or possibly did actually, ruin her career if that started a rumor and destroyed her reputation or the respect her male colleagues and professors would have for her because of the sexist framing of her relationship with her advisor and her place in the university. And I just find it ironic that she is so enraged by that, but then goes on to snicker at sexist jokes about her female colleagues and makes her own assertions that they were hired for reasons other than their academic prowess and potential contribution to their field of study. And again, I hope that that's something that's explored. I'm having less hope for that as we get to the 50% mark and there's still not an inkling of self-awareness, and I'm struggling with it. Yes? I think we have a cat visitor at the door. I am wearing pants. I know it doesn't look like I'm wearing pants. I'm wearing shorts. It's the start of fall. It's cold, so I'm wearing a big sweater, but it's not that cold, so I'm wearing shorts. You can sit with me if you want. Can you give me a second to put my blanket on my lap? Come here. Hi. Yeah. Okay. Yoda's here to join us. I don't think she has any thoughts on Katabasis, but she is here. So that's nice. We like when she's here. What was I saying? Yeah, I just feel like we're now halfway through the book and there so far has been little to no, I would say essentially no self-reflection whatsoever. Not even an inkling. Hey. No, not even an inkling of self-work and diving in to her own flaws and a lot of outward judgment of other people's. I'm starting to lose hope a little bit that we will see any of that self-reflection and growth, but I have seen a few reviews that Alice really grows and changes as a character over the course of the book, and so far there's been 0. So if that is true, a lot is going to happen in the second half of the book. Sorry, both cats are in here now, and Chewie is right beside the camera, and he is going behind all my little free library extra books and potentially about to push them all into the floor. And now Yoda is helping him, so please ignore the noises. And now I have cat hair all over my face. We also learn that Alice has no compunctions about murdering animals, animal testing, but also just killing as many mice as needed for her professor's lab. And the way it's talked about and her complete lack of empathy or care at all is honestly a little terrifying and very upsetting. So I just want to put a pin in that as well. If you are sensitive to animal cruelty, animal death in the books you read, and you count mice in that category, I would just be wary. And it could just be this one section, I'm not sure, but I found it quite upsetting to read. And again, just makes it very difficult for me to get on board with Alice as a character. I'm just getting some weird vibes from some of their conversations, especially this one. Oh, I know, inappropriate faculty-student relationships, abuse of power, that sort of thing. I hate that language. It makes it seem like we're children, helpless victims. Didn't know what we were getting into. Eyes wide shut. Okay. Oh yeah, and then here's the line where they're talking about their colleague, Helen Murray. Peter talks about how she spoke some words at Professor Grimes' funeral. You know what he used to say about her behind her back. And Alice provides that she was a spousal hire pretending to be a scholar. Okay, just do a little sexism there, Alice. Thanks for joining. Well, that too, but also Thatcher without an ass. Alice snickered. Wow, a feminist icon. Thanks, Alice. And yet, you are so angry when people are sexist toward you or act like you have less to contribute or have less of a right to be there because of your gender. And then that's how you talk about your female colleagues. Very off-putting. There's also a lot of glorifying Professor Grimes and talking about how he was the absolute worst and he was terrible. What a tyrant, but he was our tyrant. Alice is undermining her own message where she talks about how much it sucks that men in academia get to get away with being assholes because they're smart and because they're men. And she doesn't get to be an asshole because she's a woman. But then she doesn't seem concerned about the fact that they are being assholes and want them to maybe not be able to get away with being an asshole. It seems like she too wants to be able to be an asshole, and she's mad that she's not allowed to be an asshole like them. She doesn't seem to see an issue with the assholery. She sees an issue with the fact that she can't also be an asshole. Which, I mean, yeah, we should all be free to be equally assholes, I guess. Our gender shouldn't be part of the equation, I agree. But also we should all strive to be less assholey, if possible. That's just my general view on it, you know? But Alice doesn't seem to agree. Okay, what else? There's also so much in this book, and I'm getting really tired of it, and I really hope that she figures out at some point that this actually is not something to strive for, but there's this constant narrative of how suffering is proof of character and withstanding the verbal and sometimes more than verbal abuse from their professor is proof of character, is a sign of how virtuous and strong and better you are than everyone else who couldn't withstand the abuse. The point was that Professor Grimes hadn't tormented just anyone. He tormented them because they were strong enough to withstand it, because they kept the faith, because they were special and worth the effort, and because whatever they became when he was done with them would be so dazzling. It's like, okay, whatever you need to tell yourself to sleep at night. For all his crimes, there was a part of Alice that was deeply convinced he'd never done anything wrong. Honestly, I think it's at least 99.9% of Alice that believes he's never done anything wrong. She's very defensive over him. I got so mad because she is talking about how other people are worse than her because they have other victims. And she thinks that she's superior because her only victim is herself. While a few pages or paragraphs before, she went on into great detail of how incredibly efficient she got at severing the spinal columns of mice and how she did not care. Zero ethical compunctions about it. Are you fucking kidding me? No victims other than yourself? Okay. Anyways, here's the bit where she gets really upset because Murdoch and another man are talking about her in a way that she interprets as sexist, which, I mean, I would agree. It sounds pretty sexist to me, which also makes it harder to like Peter because he's being framed not only as misogynistic, but also earlier on, she goes on long paragraphs about how amazing he is and intelligent he is. And he's just so smart and so charismatic and you can't help but like him, even though he's an asshole. But then the way that she talks about him makes him incredibly unlikable, to me anyway. Most likely, Peter was just that brilliant, arrogant, and absent-minded all at once, a combination of traits that only talented men like him could be, for the world forgave them any number of transgressions so long as they dazzled. It's like, okay, but I don't forgive my characters for being that brilliant, arrogant, and absent-minded if he makes dates and then just never shows up because he doesn't give a shit and he ignores people and doesn't acknowledge their existence and receives their letters and doesn't respond, is also a misogynistic prick. I'm not going to be rooting for him and like him as a character, you know? And it feels like the narrative really wants me to like him and also forgive him for all of his transgressions because he's so dazzling. And I'm like, sorry, being smart is not enough for me to like you if you're an asshole. You couldn't blame a typhoon for its casual destruction. I mean, you could. You couldn't fault the sun for disappearing the stars. He simply did not notice the consequences of his actions. Is he a toddler? I'm pretty sure he's supposed to be full-grown adult. So yes, I can. Thank you. They probably did not remember this conversation. This was not cruelty for them. They had not decided, now, since we are misogynists, let us make fun of a girl. These were just words like water. Hear them, laugh, and move on. Probably. Peter was not trying to sabotage her then. He just really did not care. Once again, totally charming. At the beginning of this book, there's a lot of superiority on the part of the Cambridgeites, that they go to Cambridge and they seem to feel that they are superior to everyone, including people who go to Oxford. Kuang went to both Cambridge and Oxford, so I don't know. This is supposed to be sort of poking fun at the rivalry and how superior people feel at both colleges. They also seem to feel deeply superior to any universities outside of the UK, especially American universities. The pretension was a bit much, but fine, we moved on. Then we get to the start of chapter 13 and they decide to bring Canada into it. And this is when I start to get real mad. Okay. She talks about how the lead lab assistant for Professor Grimes left his job and left Cambridge to follow his pregnant girlfriend to Canada. It was not this drama, but the fact that anyone would leave Cambridge for Canada, in italics, that got the department in a tizzy. Did Canada even have universities? Or did everyone just ski and eat maple syrup and run away from bears all year round? I'm sorry, this is not 1810. This is the 1980s. Are you telling me that a woman who went to university in the northeast of the United States has never heard of the University of Toronto? Which, coincidentally, I looked it up. Our protagonist is supposed to have gone to Cornell for her undergrad. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm getting petty about this because I'm pissed off. I am pissed off about the stereotyping of Canada as like the middle of nowhere Arctic with no schools and nothing but maple syrup and skiing and bears. What are you talking about? Anyway, U of T and Cornell are ranked 20 and 21 in the world, neck and neck. And she's talking about her university experience at Cornell as this incredible, she went to Cornell. She went to this really good university in the US. Granted, no one at Cambridge knows anything about Cornell, but she does because it's a great school. They just don't know what they're talking about. But then U of T doesn't exist, and neither do any of the other world-class universities in Canada that are only a couple hours away from where she was going to university, and all existed in the 80s. Anyways, moving on. I'm so mad. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. My two best friends both went to U of T. My mother went to U of T. I was accepted to U of T. And then I decided to go get a musical theater degree because I had a bone to pick with financial stability. But listen, U of T is an amazing school, globally ranked, incredible school. Deeply offended on the part of Canada right now. We are very slowly in flashbacks learning what Alice and Peter's relationship was like. And there are a couple little passages here and there that I like. I like how they're written. I can feel their charisma in those past moments, but I struggle so much to like Alice or Peter as individuals that it's really hard to care about them being together or not. I don't care if they continue to hate each other forever at this point. Could take it or leave it. Actually, probably would more rather like to leave it. Alice believes that suicidal depression was just an extreme form of failure, which was a symptom of inadequacy. If you had sufficient force of will, then obviously you wouldn't be suicidal. Don't even know what to say at this point. She meets a character who also knew Professor Grimes and is talking about how they came to realize that the sacrifice wasn't worth it, that the abuse wasn't worth it, and they didn't want any part of it anymore. And her reaction is that obviously she knows better than this other person. You learned to read his moods. You fawned when he turned on you, groveled when he demanded an apology. It wasn't so hard as long as you sacrificed your dignity. Realizing this gave her tremendous relief. She didn't have to follow down this person's path. She was tougher. She wanted it more. And I just wrote, oh, fuck off. Because when is she going to have an aha moment? We're halfway through the book. Is she going to realize any of this at any point? I'm getting very tired of her self-delusion. And the worst part of Alice, the self-serving and nasty part, figured, why not? And I'm pretty sure the whole part of her is nasty and self-serving, but okay. I'll read the quote from this last chapter that I read that really resonated with me, because this is basically the one moment in this whole book that I've actually connected to and liked Alice. And I am hoping that this is a sign of what's to come, although again, I do feel like it's been too long. This change should have started earlier in the book. We're already halfway through. We're almost 300 pages through. Some books would be wrapping it up now, and we still haven't seen any even inklings of change. But I did like this passage. Alice sat watching, cradling her beer, and she was so happy she could have cried. Here she belonged. Here she could utter things, could be honest about where her mind had drifted, and they wouldn't look at her like she was mad. All her life she had bumbled through social contact like the only actor who'd forgotten to look at the script. She had been the weird one, the troubled one, the one no one wanted to sit with. But they were all the weird ones here. And here, no one punished you for caring too much, thinking too deeply. Here, you could jump down any rabbit hole you liked, and everyone would tunnel down with you. To rejoice in the acrobatics of thought, not as Stoics did, which was to manipulate language for mean and personal gain, but to sharpen their tools in preparation for the real digging. What greater pleasure could there be? What else was life for? She was purposefully naive about it because a naive mind, open to childlike wonder, was the happiest mind in a place like Cambridge. And I love all of that, and I can relate to that so much, and I really want to see more of that side of Alice. But I do fear that I've grown to dislike her so much that even that wouldn't be enough, even if we get more of those sides of her. But like I said, I do think that the story is picking up a little bit. The writing is smoothing out a bit. The plot is still pretty plotting, and the relationship development, the character development is all pretty stagnant. Honestly, my favorite part of this book so far are all of the asides to, literary references, working through scientific theories, talking about the intricacies of the magic they're going to do, memories of thought experiments and intellectual debates. Those are my favorite parts so far. The actual plot and the characters are not doing as much for me so far, but maybe the second half will really take off. I do think it is kind of wild that still very little has happened and there's so little progress so far, but I'm trying to stay hopeful because there are aspects of this that I'm enjoying. But I do want to do a short spoiler section. So I'm going to do that now for spoilers for Katabasis from the start to 50% of the way through, roughly page 266. So spoilers starting now. Skip this if you haven't read this yet. Okay, so basically what happens is they meet this woman who was working under Professor Grimes and ended up taking her own life. And this is where some of these conversations back and forth where Alice is deeply unsympathetic and judgmental and cruel in her thoughts about suicide and the way that she's interacting with Elsbeth and basically saying, well, I'm way better than her. I'm way stronger and more resilient and smarter than her. So I'm not going to be suicidal. And she just gave up and she's weak and all this gross stuff. But also she becomes jealous and immediately dislikes Elsbeth because when they meet, she realizes that they look alike and that Elsbeth is also dark-haired and skinny and is exactly Professor Grimes' type. And I started to get the heebie-jeebies because I was already struggling with the way that Alice was talking about her own eating disorder and her restriction and her perspective on it. But now it seems like it might be tied to the abuse from her professor, that there is some sort of grooming situation going on. Honestly, it reminded me of Nixium and Keith Raniere and the way that he forced restrictive eating disorders on the women he was grooming in his cult. And they all ended up extremely underweight because that was his type. And that's exactly what seems to be happening here, which is very unsettling to me. So we get Elsbeth was precisely Professor Grimes' type, slender, underfed, dark hair pulled into a ballerina's bun, and this identification put a sharp twist in Alice's gut. She had a hard time looking straight at Elsbeth. She hated how deeply the resemblance struck her, for no matter how she parsed it, she could not rid herself of the clear recognition that Elsbeth looked like her. What a cliché they made, brittle brunettes, sad girl smokers. She wondered, What was the attraction? And that's concerning on many levels. And again, maybe that's something that's going to be explored. Maybe she's going to realize that, or we are going to realize that through the course of the novel. It will be condemned as abusive and horrific that she's been put through this. Anyway, I don't want to talk about this for too long because, again, I'm halfway through. Who knows where this is going to be taken and how this is going to be handled in the second half. But I just wanted to make sure to note it and to note it explicitly. Been seeing a little bit of what people are saying here and there, and I have not seen one person talk about eating disorder content or a trigger warning for eating disorders. And I find that wild and baffling. I mean, maybe ignorance is bliss. And if you've never had an eating disorder, you could read this and it wouldn't even be on your radar. But as someone who has had one, it's classic, it's textbook, and textbook. Alice discovers or reads Peter's notes and assumes that that means that Peter wants to trade her life for Professor Grimes and is going to sacrifice her. And then she eventually confronts him about it. And of course, we get that trope of just not saying things, not even miscommunication, but just having a conversation and then just cutting yourself off and not finishing your sentence and not actually saying things so that they continue to believe whatever they believe about you. Peter gets angry that she would assume that about him and, is upset at her for thinking that he would be willing to sacrifice her or murder her, but never once says, I was not planning on doing that in clear terms, nor does he say, actually, this was my plan, whatever it is. Seems pretty obvious that he had some sort of different plan, but of course he won't say it to her and express it, and she won't demand that he explain himself. They'll just argue at cross purposes and then just stop and walk away and act like it's done when they still don't know where the other person is coming from. I find it so deeply frustrating to read, and I think these characters, they're in grad school, so what? They're in their 20s, their mid-20s maybe? I don't remember how old they're supposed to be, but come on. You're not 17 or something. I'm going to need characters to start talking to each other. I realize that real people struggle with communication, and to a certain extent, I get it, but if you're literally having the confrontation and having the discussion, and then you just stop before the end of your sentence to avoid giving away the thing because we're only halfway through the book, so you have to drag it out so that it's discovered later, then just don't have them have this conversation yet. If you can't actually let them have the conversation because that ruins your plot, then don't let them have the conversation instead of having them have the conversation, but not really. It's so annoying. I just want hell to be scarier, creepier, more dangerous. I kind of liked meeting that one deity who was trying to pull Peter into her web and presumably torture him and then murder him for her own entertainment. That seemed creepy, but they seemed to defeat her pretty easily and move on. And there haven't really been any other threats so far, really, other than the bone things, which are created by other sorcerers who took their own lives to go to hell and then talked about how they were going to be the first people to go to hell and come back again. And they also killed their child and took them with them. They keep murdering anyone who shows up in hell and using their blood and bodies to do magic. So yeah, that's menacing for sure, but we haven't actually met them yet. We've just seen their bone things, their creatures, and I assume we'll meet them at some point. But it just feels like there should be more dangers and more creepy, terrifying things in hell. So far, it feels pretty chill. Like they're strolling through campus, which, it does literally look like a campus for the most part so far, or a desert. But I'm kind of waiting for the hellishness of it all. Where's the eternal torment and the torture and the blood and gore? Maybe that's not what we're getting. Maybe that's not the kind of hell we're exploring, but it just feels like there's just really not that many stakes. And they only just realized halfway through that if they die in hell, they'll just be dead and that their souls won't be able to go through hell and be reincarnated like if you die on Earth, because if you die in hell, then you're just done. And they didn't know that, which I guess would be fair. How would they know that necessarily? Because if someone died in hell and then their souls ceased to exist, how would they tell anyone about it? But also, it feels kind of wild to me that they didn't discover that till halfway through. Because again, if we'd known that earlier on, maybe there would have been more stakes to some of the dangerous situations they've been in so far. I don't know. Just saying. Although they haven't really faced any fatal threats so far, so maybe not. Anyways, I'm just waiting for more stakes and excitement and development of the characters and the relationships to happen. So that's it for spoilers. I'm going to wrap it up because I've been talking for a while and I'm getting tired and I'm kind of losing my voice and I'm kind of annoyed also. I don't know if you can tell, I'm really trying to give this book the benefit of the doubt. I'm really trying to acknowledge the things that I like about it, and I'm trying to enjoy the parts that I like about it. But there are so many things that I'm finding very frustrating, and I'm finding myself being irked a lot as I'm reading, mostly because of Alice, but also for other reasons. And I just want something to happen, you know? The only thing that I really have no qualms about is all the academic talk and the references and the waxing poetic about theorems. I like those parts. They're fun. Even the ones that go over my head, I'm enjoying them. That's great. And I expected that going into this. But everything else for me right now is falling a bit flat. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments down below. Respond to the things I'm saying, your impressions, your thoughts, especially if you're reading along with me, which is very fun. Also, you can just keep editing your comment if you want to add more things, or, reply to yourself with more comments if you want to give more comments for the algorithm. I'd appreciate that. That would be cool. But either way, I would love to read your comments and have more discussions as we go. Obviously, by the time I'm reading those, I will have finished the book. I kind of wish I could talk to you all right now, but unfortunately, y'all are in the future. But I would still love to talk to you in the comments about whether you agree or disagree with me and what your experience was like reading this, because I'm struggling a bit and I need some moral support. So leave your comments down below. Let's chat. And I'm going to go read to the 75% mark, and then I will be back. Okay. See you soon. Hello, I'm 75% of the way through Katabasis, and I have more thoughts, not as many as you might expect, because honestly, still not that much is happening, to be totally frank. And then I kind of thought it would be fun to read the last quarter here, just to hang out here close to my camera setup so that anytime I have a thought or an impression, I could film it for you and kind of live react to the final quarter. I assume that many of the things I'll be reacting to will be spoilers. So I think I'm going to end up labeling the whole section of my live reacting to the last quarter as spoilers, because it probably will have a lot of spoilers. And then after I'm done doing that and I finish sharing my spoilery thoughts, I'll do a non-spoiler full final review and wrap up for this video. So it's a bit of a reverse of what I normally do at the end of a book for a reading vlog, but I thought it would be kind of fun and interesting and something different. So obviously you can't tell me now because it hasn't happened, but once you've watched it, let me know in the comments if you like this and would be interested in me doing something similar again in the future. But I will start by going through my marginalia from the 50% mark to the 75% mark, and I'll just have to put a pin in anything too spoilery to share in a spoiler section. Things are getting a tiny bit more dire. Stakes are raising a little bit, but still things don't feel all that scary or intense, hellish considering, and still not making much progress, I would say, in character development or relationship development or plot. So I'm a little bit frustrated. I don't necessarily need my books to be quickly paced, but this is a glacial pace, I would say, and very much feels like we're spinning our wheels and nothing is happening. I'll come across it in this section, but at some point Alice says, "Oh gods," which again, every time I read fantasy where, you know, the swearing is just the same as our swearing, but it's plural, I think, okay, we're getting world building. We're being told this is a polytheistic world in some way or another, because it's unlikely that someone would say, "Oh gods," if they weren't ascribing to a polytheistic religion. But then in this book, there is nothing shared about gods except for minor deities that are referenced in literature that comes up that are being talked about as if they were real, and then a few minor deities that they're interacting with in hell. There is no discussion of God and whether there is sort of a karmic equal opposite to hell in some sort of a form of heaven and what that would look like. It hasn't been referenced at all as far as I remember. Nothing about God or gods and what the belief system is around that, because it seems like hell is sort of an amalgamation of every religion's beliefs, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me in terms of all those religions literally being true and whether they counteract each other and how they can all exist together in harmony. I don't know. I'm not a scholar in that area, so what do I know? But it seems a little convenient to just say every religion is true and they all exist simultaneously. And also reincarnation is real. But then, you know, not get into any of the nitty-gritty of how that is true and how that kind of ties in with real life religions. And then again, is there a heaven? And then if there is a heaven, do some people get to go to heaven? Do you only go to heaven after, is it sort of an extension? I don't know a lot about it, but an extension of the belief of reincarnation, that you have to reincarnate however many times to reach enlightenment and then you get to go to heaven? Is that how that works? Or is there no heaven? Is there only hell? Does everyone go to hell? Is it impossible to live a life without sin? I don't know. We're not being told those answers, and I want them, especially because this whole book takes place in hell. This whole book is about interrogating hell, exploring hell, discussing hell in an academic way. It feels frustrating to me that so many of these important aspects of how hell would work and how it ties to religion on earth and whether there is that opposite and who goes where and why, that so many of these things are not even being remotely touched on, let alone being explained with the same academic rigor as, for example, theories of how you could map out hell and how it works in a spatial sense, you know? So anyway, I'm just finding it a bit frustrating. It feels like a lack of effort to contend with the repercussions of setting your story in hell from an academic perspective and simultaneously claiming truth and reality to several religions all at once. You know, that's just coming up more and more, and I'm feeling a little frustrated that the book seems to be skirting around that and not addressing it. Alice also will not stop making excuses for Professor Grimes and diminishing his behavior, and it's getting really tiresome. We're 300 pages in now, and she just will not stop. For example, here, Alice hoped they did not get that far. Cruelty had to be the end of it. Tyranny at the worst. Professor Grimes' sins were many. Yes, she was not in denial about that. But Alice could only understand him as tragically flawed, a man who made mistakes on his journey to greatness. Never malicious, only careless. Only a man whose mind was larger than the rest, a genius burdened with purpose, who couldn't spare attention for the damage he left in his wake. Like, Seriously? Really? We're still here. This is literally the perspective she had at the very start of the book. We're 300 pages in. We've explored more of what he's done. We've reckoned with that. And still, this is where we're at. No growth, no change, no self-reflection, no looking inward, reevaluating her perspective, acknowledging that he is a piece of shit. Just nothing. It's so frustrating. Oh my God. And also Peter is losing it on this, which is really funny. He's starting to really get upset with Alice for constantly glorifying and excusing his behavior. And I can relate, although I also don't like Peter, but I can relate to his frustration with Alice. This whole book happens because Alice cannot accept the idea that her advisor is dead and she would have to start over. She can't accept not having his connections, not having his reference, and having to start at square one with a new advisor. She needs to get him back. But then there's this whole paragraph here talking about the resilience and the flexibility that is required in academia. A trained magician was accustomed to this kind of panic. Science just meant failure, as Thomas Edison had shown. Science meant knowing when to cut your losses and start over and accumulate new funding, new hypotheses, new materials and ideas. You could always go to bat again if you knew how to play the game. You could always come up with something else. Okay, then do. Why did you give up half your remaining life to go rescue your terrible, awful human being of an advisor who you don't even like if a trained magician and an academic knows how to start over and cut their losses and try something new? You know, it's being framed as this thing that obviously any trained magician can do, including, of course, Alice and Peter, and yet they're incapable of accepting that they need to get a new advisor. It just doesn't make sense to me. It's very frustrating. We also are on page 300, and I believe I mentioned in the first chapter, and this isn't a spoiler because it comes up on like page 3, that it's her fault that Professor Grimes is dead, or at least she believes it's her fault. And I talked about how there was an inconsistency in the first and second chapter, or first and third chapter, where she went from saying, in some lights, you know, looking at it sideways, maybe from one perspective or another, you could maybe say it was possibly my fault, to saying, okay, it was definitely 100% my fault. Totally my fault. I killed him, essentially. We're 300 pages in, and this is where we're at with her and this. Because it's my fault, she loosed a shaky breath, then said out loud the words she'd swallowed for months because saying them out loud would make them true, and she did not want them to be true. I killed him. Girl, 300 pages ago you said you killed him. Seriously? It's been 300 pages. You've been trekking through hell. You gave up half your remaining life. You've been through so much. And literally, you're still acting like you can't admit to yourself. And this is this huge revelation that you killed him. Like, we already know. We know. You know. How are we still here after 300 pages? What in the world? And again, like, it's not a spoiler. You told us that in the first chapter. How are we still here? That's the end of chapter 19. And then the next chapter is a flashback and we get more background for Alice, and it was a lot of stuff that we could all see coming because we were reading the book and it wasn't being particularly subtle in its hints. But also we get so much more content of Alice being so anti-feminist, and it's like nails on a chalkboard to me to read this like self-hating, internal misogyny, hatred of women trying to fight for our rights as human beings. And again, we're 300 pages in and we've had this come up again and again, and it's never gone anywhere. And part of the issue with it is that most of the time that it's addressed, it's in flashbacks. And in the flashbacks, she definitely hasn't done any self-reflection. And so we just keep getting the same one note perspective from her over and over and over and over again with no chance for growth. And it's extremely frustrating. So we get gems like, there was a general consensus among the women of Alice's cohort that feminism was an embarrassing fad, a bygone fever of the 70s. She couldn't stand those screeching activists who believed the only politically just thing was to become a lesbian. Wow. That scary word, discrimination, it was also embarrassing. It felt less like a revolution than a tantrum. It seemed the best way to prove women were not inferior was just to not be inferior. How hard could that be? Okay, this is our protagonist. Wow, what a lovable gem she is. She's talking about in college having several classes with a female colleague. Occasionally, Lacey turned to Alice for solidarity, and Alice rebuffed those overtures. "Do not come to me," she thought. "We are not alike." She thought Lacey gave women a bad name, that her complaints justified everything men believed about women. Alice is such a pick-me, such a not like other girls, it's not even funny. But Alice was not prepared for how astonishingly, indeed comically, bad it would be. Yeah, it's almost like she had no empathy or understanding of why women might care about feminism until she personally experienced misogyny, and then she thought, oh wow, this actually does kind of suck. Really? Does it? Wow, it's almost like those women weren't talking out of their ass, and there were actually real injustices that they were fighting that you diminished constantly. Alice, however, was still convinced by the impossible mean, the idea that there might exist some perfect line between femininity and subjugation, wherein if she could only wear clothes that were both perfectly attractive and perfectly modest, she could both enjoy the attention that being a woman in the department got her while also commanding respect as a scholar. That's totally a doable thing that you can do, and just you and no other woman. Definitely achievable. Good luck on that. Favoritism was all right as long as it benefited her, is one gem. She thought she'd learned to inhabit the impossible ideal, the girl who was eminently fuckable but unreachable, and therefore virtuous and perfect. Charming. Alice was both attractive and restrained, and this made her feel superior. Alice was different from them. They were wives in the making, and she was a magician. Again, she is so deeply unlikable. It's absolutely wild. Alice eventually finds, the misogyny in the workplace, in academia, a little overwhelming and decides to try to get support. So she goes to one of the department heads, Helen Murray, for support from another woman because it's hard and she has decided that it's real, I guess, and needs support. And then it starts with, Helen did not particularly like Alice, not because of anything Alice had ever done. And I'm just thinking, what? You've spent this whole book making fun of Helen Murray specifically. Rumors spread about her. You clearly think she's embarrassing, a spousal hire, has nothing to offer. You've literally said as much. Jokes about her unattractive laugh and judgments about her physical appearance. But no, she definitely dislikes you for things that have nothing to do with who you are and things you've done and said. Definitely not your fault at all, Alice. But it's not, the way they treat women, it's not fair. Helen's lip curled. Ah, you're a feminist now. Helen hosted the annual Women in Magic conference at Cambridge, but Alice had never gone. No one in her cohort bothered to go. Belinda went her first year and came back rolling her eyes. Just a bunch of crones wishing the men would die. No one in her cohort was a feminist. They eschewed the label. They thought it would only bring them trouble. Girls like you despise women like me, isn't that so? You think we are wrong to insist on the differences of our sex. You find our activism embarrassing. You think we complain too much. The accusation was just. All these things were true. But Alice had always harbored these thoughts as sneaky conviction. She could not really justify them because they're not justifiable. Helen pressed on. And why wouldn't you think that? You've never known a locked door. Your mothers were educated. Your schools were co-ed. And so you think the whole world is open to you. You want to wear slacks and shirts without bras and drink all night long with the boys. And you want everyone to treat you just the same. This was not about her anymore. It was not even about Grimes. It was about Helen getting her word in, and Alice was merely the audience. I really don't feel like Alice is a reliable narrator here because, again, Alice has actively participated in bullying and rumor spreading and misogynistic judgment of Helen, and it's not unreasonable to assume that Helen has heard about the things that Alice has said and the jokes she's laughed at and the general consensus. And so why would this not have something specifically to do with Alice, who is extremely vocally anti-feminist, when that's what they're talking about? Like, obviously it's about her. What you must realize, Alice, is that you cannot just take refuge in feminism when it suits you. Of course you don't. You don't respect me enough for that. You think I am, what was it? A spousal hire in a girdle? I didn't. Oh, but Alice had. They'd all said it. They received the gossip first from their advisors and they giggled about it among themselves, told stories at late nights at the pub. Does Helen even publish? Does anyone take Helen seriously? What will happen when he divorces that cow? Oh, Jesus fucking Christ. But Professor's ears were much closer to the ground than anyone thought. Alice should have known this because she knew Grimes was acutely aware of everything everyone said about him. Again, clearly none of this has to do with Alice directly. Definitely not. Helen's definitely just going on a pre-rehearsed screed that has nothing to do with Alice specifically because she's such an angry feminist. We're now on page 359 and we get Peter still being frustrated that Alice won't stop defending Grimes. "You're doing it again," said Peter. "Doing what?" "Valorizing him, defending him. You always make him out to be this great, larger-than-life genius." "Well, because he was. He's just an asshole, Law." "No, he isn't," her voice hitched. "Don't you understand? He can't have been. Otherwise, we let some person jerk us around. And it makes it better if he was a genius? Not better, but worth it." It's fine for this to be part of the character development, and it's probably realistic and reasonable for someone who's in a really unhealthy, toxic teacher-student, mentor-mentee, verbally abusive dynamic with that power imbalance to develop some coping mechanisms like this and trying to rationalize it. But for us to be 360 pages into this book and for this to still be her perspective, like, we have not gone anywhere. The character arcs in this book are dots. We haven't gone anywhere at all. We've maybe regressed a bit, actually, if that's even possible. Even at the end of this, like, it seems like she's maybe recognizing here that this is her coping and not actually reality. But then further down the same page, she thinks, "He wasn't a bully, wasn't a tyrant. After all, what all those abusers usually boiled down to was insecurity and incompetence, and Professor Grimes was neither." As if someone who isn't insecure and isn't incompetent can't be a bully or a tyrant. Pretty sure we all know that that's not the case. But anyway, she goes on to think, "All he ever did was utter a stern word. I mean, we literally know he did more than utter a stern word. You have told us for the last 360 pages all the other things he did that were more bad than uttering a stern word. He only ever held them to the same exacting standards to which he held himself." Again, just patently false. Being upset with Grimes was synonymous with being bad at your job. Okay. And even now, in the pits of hell, Alice could not shake the conviction that if she had gotten into a tizzy about it, then it was all her own fault. Still, we're still here. Zero growth. Zero change. Can you tell how frustrated I am? Truly at the end of my rope. Okay. There's some references that are interesting that make me want to read other books or reread other books. That's fun. Everything else is so frustrating though. Okay. Magic. Oh yeah. Oh, gods, Peter. Are there multiple gods? Does she believe in multiple gods? We don't know. She also makes everything about herself and always is the victim and is very self-pitying, performative guilt. And then on page 368, the book finally acknowledges the fact that this whole thing so far has been a lot of Alice and Peter just not saying things to each other, not even misunderstanding each other, though that is part of it too, but literally just not saying things to each other, just not talking. And it gets to the point where it admits that all it would have ever taken was an honest word, but that was precisely what magicians lacked. There were no honest words, only puns and illusions and constructions of a reality so convoluted that you couldn't keep track anymore of what was real and what wasn't. Everyone was always trying so hard to pretend they were somebody else. Okay, I guess that explains it, but it doesn't excuse 368 pages of zero growth and change and communication in their relationship when they're stuck, literally just the two of them in hell this whole time. Oh my God. I did like the poem that shows up between chapter 23 and 24. So there's that. Lines that are parallel meet at infinity, Euclid repeatedly, heatedly urged, until he died and so reached that vicinity. In it he found that the damned things diverged. Hilarious. Genuinely, I said that in a very deadpan way because of all the other stuff we're talking about, but I actually laughed when I read that the first time. So thought I'd share something positive. Okay, we get more background for Alice and Grimes, why their relationship is the way it is. His was the first plank in her staircase of belief, and in a world founded on insincerity and insecurity, that faith was a debt she would always feel she had to repay. We definitely get more of her self-pity and making everything about herself. At this point, kind of hard for me to talk about in specifics without spoilers, so I'll probably say this for the spoiler section, but it was very frustrating to read because it actually, in fact, was not about her, and she was, in fact, not the one suffering the most in this situation, and she's still making it about herself and acting like her guilt, basically, for someone else's sacrifice is worse than the other person's sacrifice, when it just obviously, clearly, in every possible way, by every definition, is simply not, you know? Just no. Stop. She would have preferred to faint, for that would have relieved her of the burden of consciousness. And yet earlier, she was making fun of female colleagues for fainting. How the turns have tabled, Alice. And it was all her fault. She truly can't stop thinking everything is about her and everything is her fault, as if she is the only person on the entire planet and in all of hell who has true free will and makes decisions and causes things to happen. Maybe she thinks she is the unmoved mover. Wouldn't that be a twist? I wonder if that's the ending everyone is in a tizzy about. Imagine Alice was the unmoved mover. It would explain her self-aggrandizing, I suppose. She also is very much a black and white thinker. She does not think about people from a nuanced point of view. We've seen that with Grimes so many times, but also with Peter. She either is thinking about Peter like he is the worst ever, has ruined her whole life and career, is nasty and terrible, or he's never done anything wrong, always been a saint. She is the evil one. Like, she can't think about anything from a nuanced point of view, which is frustrating to say the least. Oh yeah, we get more glorifying of what it feels to starve, basically, which I'm really losing patience for because it's not being interrogated or looked at from a nuanced point of view. It's not being challenged at all. And I'm finding the way that it's glorifying it honestly, some of the way that some of these passages about her eating disorder are written reminds me of blogs that I should not have had access to in the 2000s. Why? I don't understand why this is being included, especially because maybe it'll be addressed in the last quarter of the book. It could be, for sure, but we're 400 pages in and we're still bringing back this very pro-Anna type rhetoric, and it's never being addressed or criticized whatsoever. Page 402, she's still defending Grimes. He stole, but for good reason. He was cruel, with good purpose, to those who deserved it. Except not true. We literally know this is not true. Her level of self-delusion is staggering, and honestly, I think keeps getting worse somehow. Truly baffling. She also regularly tells shades, so dead people in hell, that she doesn't understand why they're so upset about being dead, why they would want to go back to life, and also that she doesn't really care about the fact that she's actually not dead and can go back, presumably, to her life and continue to live life, and she isn't trapped in hell forever. And she keeps talking about it so flippantly, and then the shades get upset for obvious reasons. And then each time she reacts with bafflement and not understanding how possibly she could have upset them. She sensed she had upset him, but how? She could not say. How can someone be so oblivious? She sensed only his resentment, a bitter and hostile wave, as abrupt as it was confusing. Again, how is that confusing? You literally said that you don't care about being alive to someone who has been trapped in hell for potentially centuries and obviously very much misses being alive. How could he possibly be upset? And Alice, while accustomed to placating volatile men, knew only to await her punishment, which also, okay, so much of this book genuinely examines how shitty it is to be a woman in academia and why misogyny sucks, and it shows us men, specifically Grimes, but, men in general, who are kind of the worst, and how she has to tiptoe around them and placate them. Totally fair, and it's a theme of the story, fine, and it comes up so many times in a way that makes total sense to me and is realistic. But in this case, he's not upset at her because he's a man and she's a woman. She doesn't have to placate him because he's a man and he's feeling rage tied to the patriarchy or toxic masculinity or gender roles or something. He's justifiably upset because he's stuck in hell and dead and wishes he was still alive, and she is technically still alive and has what he could only dream of, and is talking about it so flippantly as if she doesn't care, could take it or leave it, and life is pointless. He's not upset for a gendered reason. She's very good at constantly claiming that everything is her fault and sort of performing her guilt and repentance, but then anytime something is actually her fault, she cannot fathom that she could have anything to do with it, or that someone else's upset could have anything to do with her. And it is making me enraged. And that's it. Okay. So those are all my thoughts. Those are my non-spoilery comments and thoughts that I had reading from the 50% mark to the 75% mark. So spoilers now from 50% to 75%. So first of all, we learn for sure, I think I talked about this being a theory of mine earlier on, but basically we learn that Grimes does in fact attempt to sleep with his female students, and specifically his female advisees, that he tends to pick students who fit his physical type or could fit his physical type, and then encourages them to continue to become more his type by by restricting and becoming skinnier and dressing in a certain way and wearing their hair up in a ballerina bun. He likes a certain type and he seeks them out. So we learn that for sure, and we learn that he tried to sleep with her and more context around it, but we also learn some hard to swallow facts about Alice and how she felt about this dynamic until it went too far. So we get, if anyone had asked Alice why she never reported Professor Grimes for any of the things he'd ever said or done to her, she would have explained that there was nothing to report because it was all her fault. Again, everything is either all her fault or she has never done anything wrong in her whole life. Nothing in between. It was her fault, see, because when she first heard that Professor Grimes had a problem keeping his hands to himself around female students, she felt a thrill of excitement. Oh, sure, she'd professed disgust in public, and then in private wondered if she was pretty enough, delicate enough, and thin enough to attract that same attention. He liked girls who looked like ballerinas, they said, sad, twiggy things with daddy issues. And she went home and held her hair up in a bun at the back of her head and wondered if she passed muster. Again, very much tying into the constant eating disorder restriction talk throughout the whole book. And I did say in one of the spoiler sections that I was starting to get a vibe of grooming, and specifically grooming young women to restrict to become more the type of the man who's grooming them. And that seems to be exactly the case here. But oh, how thrilling it was to walk on that line, to exist in that liminal space between virtue and sin. How her heart fluttered when his gaze landed on her during a lecture, when his lips quirked in approval at some observation she'd made. How she loved being his favorite. Alice has done it. The rest of you need to be more like Alice. She knew he found her attractive. She had noticed too many lingering glances, too many hands on her shoulder that stayed much longer than they should have, to remain in doubt whether her professor would sleep with her if given the chance. This knowledge gave her a twisted sense of power, as long as she didn't act on it, because she could. She could. All she had to do was say yes. She knew this was possibly why he'd picked her as an advisee, why he took her along to conferences and research trips. She knew what they said about Professor Grimes behind closed doors and sometimes to his face. He loved showing up with a pretty girl on his arm. Well, if it was only his arm, that was all right. Favoritism was all right, so long as it benefited her. She thought she'd learned to inhabit the impossible ideal, the girl who was eminently fuckable but unreachable, and therefore virtuous and perfect. Alice was both attractive and restrained, and this made her feel superior, even as she witnessed Professor Grimes disappearing into hotel rooms with other women from the conference. Alice was different from them. They were wives in the making, and she was a magician. She knew how to walk the line. She liked dazzling them all at conferences with her professionalism and poise, her pencil skirts and clacking heels. She snickered wryly at the lewd jokes the old guard made and shot down anyone who came on to her. She could not tell where Professor Grimes' malfeasance ended and where her complicity began. She could not sort out what she'd done wrong. And yes, at the end of the day, he's the one in the wrong. He's the one with the power in this situation. He should not be doing this. It's unethical. But also, she is playing into it purposefully, and she's trying to benefit from it. And kind of like that conversation that comes up later with Helen, she wants to get the benefits of sleeping with her professor without sleeping with her professor and without her professor actually coming on to her, but she wants her professor to think he can so that she's his favorite. She's really trying to have her cake and eat it too. And it's like, yeah, you're playing with fire. Then they're in the office late at night and they're both drunk and he comes on to her and she's quickly turned off. He's too human. It's too sharp-edged. Everything seems grotesque. All the qualities she admired, genius, brilliance, and a sharp and cruel intellect inscribed, after all, in a crude and mortal body. His breath was sharp, sour, and she suppressed a gag. How quickly the buzz vanished. Her laughter died in her throat. His other hand traced her waist, moved lower. You fucking tease, he said. God, your ribs. He said. He seems to have a kink for skeletal women, and that keeps coming up again and again. And she finally has to fully push him off and yell for him to stop. And then he's, of course, butthurt. His ego is hurt, and he starts ignoring her and treating her poorly and choosing Murdoch to be his assistant. And just in general, being a petty little child. And Murdoch saw them together, so then he got the wrong idea or the right idea, depending. But of course, he spreads rumors about it. So he tells their colleagues that she is sleeping with Grimes, which is uncool of him. And then Alice unraveled very quickly. After that, her self-esteem plummeted, her moods grew erratic, her work uneven. She tried everything to get back into Professor Grimes' good graces, but being a tryhard only intensified his disdain. At her lowest, she tried again to seduce him. She wore those black tights and short skirts he'd said once that he liked. She kept her blouse tops unbuttoned. She tried every old trick in the toolbox, sitting with her legs suggestively crossed, bending down lower than she needed so the curve of her ass was on full display. I'm here, she tried to tell him. I'm willing. Have me. He pretended she did not exist. And this leads right into her going to Helen to ask for help and to complain about Grimes' behavior. And we get this whole back and forth where she's upset and acting like Helen has no reason to be frustrated with her trying to walk that line. And then when it didn't work out for her, as they were saying, it doesn't work. There is no way to escape this oppressive system that is the patriarchy and misogyny. You cannot have your cake and eat it too. You cannot get the best of both worlds. There is no perfect mean. She didn't listen, and then she got burned, and then she was upset, but she's still unwilling to actually call herself a feminist or align with the cause whatsoever. She wanted Grimes' attention, but also his respect. She adored his power, except for when he used it against her. She wanted no special treatment for her sex, and still she felt wronged. In a way, she felt that only women could be wronged. And then we get to the end of chapter 21, and of course, we get that moment where this whole time Alice has been thinking and saying that she killed Professor Grimes, and it's her fault. And of course, we get the reveal that Peter thinks that he killed Professor Grimes. Oh no, who could have seen it coming? That they both think that they killed Professor Grimes. Not me. Definitely didn't predict that early on. We also learn in this flashback, for the first time, we get a flashback for Peter, and we learn that he is a child genius that grew into an adult genius, but also that he had chronic illness, that he has Crohn's disease, and that has been very hard for him. And then we, of course, get Professor Grimes being weirdly ableist and condescending about how he should be grateful to be disabled and have a chronic illness because some of the greatest minds were disabled, and that makes it even easier for them to focus on their work, I guess. So much weirdly light and flippant discussion of suicide in this book. We get Peter thinking that he's too tall to comfortably kill himself on page 356. Some thoughts are inside thoughts. Oh yeah, so Peter sacrifices himself for her. He basically says, I will be killed by the evil, murderous magicians who are here in hell so that you can get away. And he does so against her wishes. And she's upset about it, and she's grieving, and she makes it all about her, and she talks about how it's definitely more painful for her to feel guilty and to grieve Peter's death. Definitely worse to be her than to be him dying a extremely excruciatingly painful death and just literally being murdered. Definitely it's worse for her to feel sad. And grief is terrible. I have been grieving for the last several months, and it's the worst. It's awful. It feels terrible. I wouldn't wish that kind of grief on anyone, but also definitely less painful than being murdered, you know? There are degrees of suffering. And she seems to have no conceptualization that anyone could suffer more than her, literally ever, even if they're being murdered. She'd have given anything to change places. She wished to feel those blades digging into her skin, pulling her veins apart, because compared to this pain, that evisceration would be so clean and sweet. Seriously? Really? Even after everything Peter did and literally sacrificing his life for you, that's not enough for you to accept that maybe he's going through more than you and to just be grateful. You have to make it about yourself and act like your grief over his death is worse than his actual experiencing his death. I can't with Alice. I can't. She makes me so angry. She didn't recognize this person, this nasty, resentful, scheming little bitch. But memories didn't lie. She had done it and said it all, and she had to live with the guilt. All Peter had ever done was save her life. Except, no, not though. He also did bad things. He also stood you up for dates, which is not that bad, but still. He stood you up for dates, he ignored you, he spread rumors about you, told everyone you were sleeping with your professor, made sexist jokes about you, didn't answer your heartfelt letters, literally ignored you to your face. He did lots of stuff other than just save your life. But again, there's no nuance. Everything is just black or white, good or bad, that's it. Also, like I said, we get to this point, we're at page 386, and now, because she's upset that Peter is dead, which is fair and reasonable, she's decided that she actually doesn't care about being alive, but she can't die because that would be basically unfair to Peter because he sacrificed himself for her, so she has to keep living, but she doesn't care about anything anymore, and she doesn't care about saving Grimes. She's actually decided it doesn't matter, her future doesn't matter, her career doesn't matter, and Grimes doesn't matter, which is kind of wild after almost 400 pages pages because that's been the driving force this whole time, but apparently now she does not care whatsoever. Her original quest seems so silly now. She didn't care to find Professor Grimes. She might be content if she never saw Professor Grimes again. The scales had fallen from her eyes, but she could not imagine any other future for herself. Everything she'd ever wanted now felt so frivolous, their pursuit agonizing. Okay, great. So now we're 400 pages in, and now your only purpose for going through all the suffering and going on this journey and being here no longer matters to you. Perfect. So why are we here and why are we reading this book? I would like to know. Okay, and final thing that I noted as a spoiler was, again, just more passages that are glorifying restriction and starvation, which again, I'm not going to read to you, but page 392, just really glorifying the light feeling that you get when you're starving, which again is pro-type rhetoric. And it's just constant. It comes up so many times in this book. And like I said already, it's triggering, but also why? Why is it here? Like, I just don't understand what it adds. And I highly doubt we're going to get self-reflection on her eating disorder now that we are only 140-ish pages to the end, but maybe she'll have a revelation. But anyways, those are the spoilery thoughts for 50 to 75% of the way through. My theories are that Peter is not actually dead somehow, because it would kind of be wild if he was, to be honest. If his whole soul was obliterated. Also, I wouldn't understand how any of this could ever be marketed as a romance if he was dead now, because nothing ever happened between them. They didn't even admit their feelings for each other. I assume that they're not actually going to save Grimes at the end. Either they're going to find him and decide not to save him, or they just never find him, and maybe that's why people are frustrated by the ending after everything. Could understand why it would be frustrating. So those are two of my theories. But I think what I'm going to do, like I said, is continue this spoiler section. I'm just going to start reading from chapter 27 to the end. And anytime I have something I want to say, I will, film my reaction and I'll share it in the moment as we go. Hello, friends. It's the next day and I'm ready to finish Katabasis. I am using my other camera because it takes up less hard drive space to record on this one. And this is probably going to be a long clip, but I'm ready to go. I'm ready to read and react. So let's do it. I'll fast forward through the parts where I'm just reading and nothing much is happening, but I will go to real time when I have reactions and thoughts to share. So let's do it. But yeah, so all this is spoilers now. So you're warned, of course, that everything I react to is in the last quarter of the book, so it's going to be a spoiler. Anyway, she's in hell, she's in Dis, and she's talking to Gertrude, one of the shades, and Gertrude is the head of, or works with the rebel order, the rebel citadel, and they basically have pledged to never cross over. And they're building over time and basically pledging to stay in hell. And Alice is totally blown away by Gertrude and sort of in awe of her. In her internal monologue, she says, "Wasn't there a perverse beauty to it all? What conviction to do wrong and stand by it? How much bolder it was than to do right simply because one was afraid." Just then Alice envied Gertrude. At least Gertrude knew what she stood for. At least Gertrude had a future to fight for, far away as it was. And it's like, girl, Gertrude is dead. She can't go anywhere. She is stuck in hell for all of time. You are still alive. What do you mean? Like, you're the one who has a future. Also, it's funny to me that she's so blown away by the idea of doing wrong and sticking by it. Like, that is the greatest thing one could do. I also find the framing kind of funny and stupid. Comparing doing wrong and standing by it and doing right only because you're afraid, as if there are no other options. What if you do right and stand by it? Doesn't that take more conviction? I guess that's not a comparison she's interested in drawing, but I just find it interesting. Okay, wait. My hair is getting in the way and pissing me off, so I'm gonna clip it up. Sure. Okay, back to reading. Okay, sorry, this is so annoying. We're on page 439 and she's still talking about her guilt and what's her fault and what isn't, but also she's still wishing to go back to flirting with danger, flirting with that line, having her cake and eating it too. She literally says that. And she remembered gazing at him and not wishing he were gone, but that things could go back to normal, that she could keep dancing on the line, flirting with danger, have her cake, eat it too. After all this, I would honestly relate a lot more to Alice and like her a lot more if she was going scorched earth after everything, got angry and genuinely wanted, maybe not to murder Grimes, maybe that's a lot, but it's fantasy, so whatever. But like, at least have real rage for him and want to not associate with him anymore, or want to like mess up his life and take over and leave him sad and alone. What is this wanting to go back to how things were before, where you're trying to seduce him, but not so far that he actually does anything about it? Why is that what she wants? Why is that the status quo that she dreams of? I just don't understand her obsession with him and their dynamic, even though she's apparently already acknowledged to herself that it was terrible and unfair and she wasn't really being respected and she was being objectified. Like, I cannot relate to this reaction, you know? And I don't have to relate to everything that a character does or says or feels, but I'm finding it so hard to read Alice's story and to feel anything but frustration about the choices that she's making and the things she does and says. I really don't care at this point. And it truly feels like we're not going to get any change or growth for her for the entire book, which is baffling, to say the least. Whatever. Let's keep going. It's fine. Okay, so on the last page, 2 pages ago, I was going to stop and say something, and then I felt like I had nothing fresh to say. But now I feel like it's contradicting itself between 2 pages. On page 440, we get, in the past year, Alice had learned 1,001 tricks for distracting her mind from wanting to die. Rituals helped. Keeping herself busy helped. She was not one of the depressives who lay stinking in bed, which is what I was going to point out, because that feels very ableist and judgmental. She could not just lie there. The stillness hurt worse. Moving staved the agony. And goes on and on about how she tried to cram her life with activities and appointments and tried to keep her mind busy to keep the stress out. But then 2 pages later, she talks about wasting a bunch of time in her time on Earth and during her life. She thought to all the hours she had ever wasted in her life, all the minutes she had watched count down on the clock, waiting for them to go faster. Whole days she had spent confined to her room like a prisoner. I thought she just said that she wasn't one of those depressives, and now apparently she spent whole days in her room, sitting blankly on her chair. Okay, different from lying stinking in bed, I guess. Anticipating the ritual marks that proved time was going by. Meals she didn't eat. Of course, we have to once again draw attention to her eating disorder. Perfect. Prayers she didn't attend. The bells at all hours reminding students it was time to get going. She'd been so relieved to sleep, so disappointed to wake. Back then, every hour that slipped by her seemed like a tiny victory. But why had she been so eager for that time to disappear? What was that countdown to? To me, that feels completely antithetical to what she was saying 2 pages ago, that she couldn't sit in silence at all, didn't want to sit around and do nothing because that was more painful than stillness. Here, it seems like she's talking about spending a lot of time or wasting a lot of time in stillness, just waiting for the time to pass. Okay. I find it very annoying when books are so inconsistent. Like, what are you trying to tell me? Unless she's just supposed to be a very unreliable narrator, but it's not framed that way. It's just framed as, this is the fact. This is a, omniscient third-party narrator telling the story, and they're telling it all over the place. And it's annoying to me. What am I supposed to believe? How am I supposed to picture or understand her life before she came to hell if she both spent hours and days locked in her room, staring at the wall, sitting in her chair, waiting for time to pass, waiting for the time to go to sleep, but also that she never rotted in bed because she's not one of those depressives and she had to constantly be moving and doing things and going places and thinking about stuff. Which is it? It's so frustrating to me. Okay, it's fine. Going back to reading now. I need to keep going. This is going to take me forever. I was about to pause to say I'm really struggling with this chapter and I really don't understand what the point is of this whole time in Dis other than learning more about the world, I guess, but it feels like the entire plot has stagnated, even though it was barely moving before, but now it just feels like she's not actually actively looking for Grimes. What is she doing here? What is the purpose of this book continuing? Is she about to have some character growth? I don't know. She's just listening to people tell stories and reacting in the exact same way as she would have reacted 450 pages ago. But now I see what the purpose was, I imagine, because she just thought through these shades who are slowly turning into roots and trees and bushes and things in the Rebel Citadel and says out loud, well, why don't you just die then if you're just waiting forever for nothing? And that wakes up a shade who then runs and jumps off the building into the Lethe and ceases to exist. And she finally has a wake-up call that she actually doesn't want to die. So I guess that was, for some reason, the straw that broke the camel's back in terms of her suicidality. I'm not sure why. She didn't know the shade. She's seen death before. For some reason, this is more motivating to her to continue living than Peter sacrificing himself and dying a painful death to keep her alive. Feel like that would have been more emotionally resonant as a reason for her to find her will to live, but fine. And I guess that's what this chapter is for. So maybe something will happen next chapter, because like, I'm really trying. There are things that I like about this, okay? The world building is interesting and cool. I wish it was a bit more expanded, but I like it. The magic is kind of interesting. I like the premise. The themes are worth exploring. But these characters are so dry and flat. And there's no plot. Like, the plot is go to hell, save Grimes, wander around hell, occasionally talk about Grimes, remember your times alive with Grimes, wander around some more, talk about how you have to find Grimes, eventually basically give up on finding Grimes, continue to wander through hell. Like, that is not compelling to me. Okay, so she just ran out of Dis, but again, what is her purpose now? She wants to be alive. Okay, so is she gonna try to go back home? Is she still gonna try to find Grimes? She was in Dis and thought maybe he was there, but she literally did not look for him at all. I just feel like there's no direction. There's no purpose right now. What are we doing? Where are we going? Is Peter gonna come back? I don't really like Peter either, but at least when they were together, there was a little bit more happening, you know? Okay, chapter 29. No matter which map was right, Peter's spiral / pizza / anus. Ahaha. Anus. So funny. Why? She could just say no matter which map was right. Peter's spiral, her linear progressive map. It doesn't have to be some weird, quirky, stupid joke about it looking like a pizza or an anus. Maybe that's just not, I mean, I know that's just not my sense of humor, but why? Like, is this supposed to be a dramatic moment? The tone of this is really not landing for me. I feel like the moments where it tries to be funny, for the most part, I find I hesitate to use the word cringe because I think it is, in fact, cringy to find everything cringe. It just feels like it's trying too hard so much of the time. The parts that I genuinely find funny are things like that poem about parallelism, or when Elsbeth said, "Don't quote Nietzsche on my boat." That's funny. This randomly saying anus, not funny. At least not to me. Anyway. Okay, now she's literally just wandering aimlessly through a featureless void. How exciting. Time slipped by. She stopped counting the days. She lost track of the sun, the moon. She suspected the moon had disappeared. Whenever she searched the sky, she couldn't find it. She found she didn't get hungry or thirsty anymore. How is that different from all the rest of the times when you had to remind us how little you eat and how you're never hungry? When she did eat, she felt nourished, but otherwise her body felt theoretical. Okay. She was bored and desperate and ready to give it all up. Same, Alice. Same. This is like pretty much the first time I've related to Alice for this entire book, except for the time that she said that she always felt weird and she felt at home when she was amongst other weirdos. Could also relate to that. But being bored and desperate and ready to give it all up, that's exactly how I feel about this book right now. Okay, I don't understand this. It seems like suddenly the thing that she's been doing since the beginning, which is repeating, I am Alice Law, I am a postgraduate at Cambridge, I study analytic magic, is suddenly something that can clear her mind and allow her to spread out all of her memories and thoughts and sort through them rationally. She's been doing this since the beginning. So now is the first time it's working? Is it because she's wandering in this featureless void that suddenly it's working? Because she's been doing this since the beginning. This isn't a new thing she just started. And I guess now she's decided she's going to try to make her life count, because this ends very dramatically in italics for some reason, unlike all of her other thoughts. My name is Alice Law. Sometimes I am very clever, but most of the time I am not. I have been a good person sometimes and a bad person at others. Sooner or later I will die, but before I do, I will try very hard to make it count. Okay. Show me then. Make it count. Do something. I feel like, is that a meme or from a show or something? I don't know what the reference is, but someone like poking something with a stick, asking it to do something. That's how I feel about this book right now. Just do something. Please. Make something happen. Anything. Explode everything. Make it the apocalypse. I don't know. Turn it into a musical. I usually hate that. Even though I love musicals, I usually hate when that's used as a as a Hail Mary. But literally anything, please. We just established that finally she's decided she really doesn't want to die, but now she's run into this emaciated leopard, and she's only feeling this dull, abstract fear. She simply could not summon any true panic at the thought of having her jugular ripped out, her blood spilling and sinking into the soft gray. It seemed an abstract proposal to her, and an aesthetically interesting one at that. Maul was such a meaty word, so visually suggestive. She had a guilty want to hurl herself into its fangs and witness the subsequent slash and tear. So then you haven't found a strong will to live, which is fine. I mean, it's fine if she just is kind of suicidal all the time. If that's her characterization, okay. But then why did we just a few pages ago go through this revelation from this random shade jumping into the Lethe that now she definitely doesn't want to die anymore and she's found her will to live, only for a couple pages later for her to go back on that and be like, actually, never mind. No, I still do want to die. Okay, that's fine. But again, it's like, I feel like every time we take a step forward, and not necessarily forward as in like any direction, any part of her characterization changes at all. And then a few pages later, we go right back to where we were before. Nothing sticks. Nothing is progressive. What is the purpose? I feel like I'm gonna start going on tangents, but I feel like people get so annoyed at me or get upset with me when I ask what the point of a book is. And I'm not saying, anything, I'm not moralizing, but I feel that art should exist for a reason. The reason could be to be entertaining or to be funny or whatever. It doesn't have to have some deep world-changing reason necessarily. But I always wonder, why someone put in the huge amount of effort it takes to write an entire book and go through the publishing process. And then also, why am I, as a reader, going to spend my money and spend hours and hours of my time consuming the story? What is the purpose? What is the author trying to say? What do they want this book to do? What are they trying to give me? What am I getting out of it? Those aren't always the same thing. But reading something like this, I just think, okay, but why though? Why? Why does this exist? What am I supposed to be getting out of it? I already know that misogyny exists in academia, so that's not new. And I've read books that take place in hell. I've read books that talk about hell. So, the idea that hell exists isn't brand new. I have read books about characters who are suicidal. That's not new. And again, it doesn't have to be like a brand new, unique thing that's never been seen before, but I'm just wondering why does this particular book exist? And maybe we're going to find out in the last 50, close to 100 pages why it exists. But then why did I have to read 450 pages to get to the part of the book where something actually happens, Like, I'm just starting to feel like I'm wasting my time. And that's never a good feeling. Like, I bought this book with my own money. I am putting so much of my time into reading it and then trying to sort my thoughts out so I can share them with you and entertain you. At least there is that side effect that I can make a video out of it, but I'm feeling so frustrated. I honestly kind of want a DNF, which I'm not going to do because I'm making this video and that would be a really anticlimactic ending, but I just don't know why I should care about this, And I'm feeling very frustrated. I'm going to make a coffee. That's going to make me feel better. I'm going to pause this. I'm going to make a coffee, and then I'm going to try to feel slightly less pessimistic about how this is going because I'm struggling. Maybe I'm not angry, love you just the same. Let agoraphobia someday, and all your days are sunny. From your window pane, wish you a lifetime full of happiness, and forever of never getting late. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, a maple pecan coffee is gonna make me feel better. Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay. There is a lot of animal cruelty and animal death in this book. I mean, I say a lot. There's probably a lot more in other books, okay? But it keeps coming up. We're now watching this desiccated, starving leopard be punctured by a bunch of knives and bleeding out. And it's being described in maybe not excruciating detail, but enough detail. And I just think, why though? What did all these animals do to R.F. Kuang? I don't love it. I mean, of course, some people are going to be more sensitive to animal harm and death and cruelty than others, but I'm definitely not a fan. And I also struggle to think that Alice really cares, considering the passage earlier where she talked about really not giving a shit about all the mice that they killed in their research and how quickly she learned to sever their spinal columns and that it really didn't bug her at all to kill them with her bare hands. So it's hard for me to truly believe that she's upset about this leopard who seemed on the edge of death anyway, being killed even in a bloody way, But fine. What the fuck? What? She's ravenous because of smelling this leopard's blood? When she came to, when her panic ebbed and her pulse slowed, she was ravenous. The beast's blood did it. Its stench suffused the air, musky, salty, delicious. Maybe I've just been a vegan for too long, but what the ever-loving fuck. She crawled to her knees, and after she'd flung her fingers through the sand and diffused the trap for good, she pressed her face against the corpse and moaned. What the fuck? She couldn't get enough of it. It wasn't just the blood and lingering warmth. It was the sheer grossness of the corpse. She had not been around this much living viscera, the moist and squishy components of life for so long. Hell starved the senses. All was so clean and quiet down here, so sterile, but the cat's stench was proof that life was messy, full of blood and guts and gristle. Decomposition meant life. She wanted to roll in that mess. She had the overwhelming urge to dump a bucket over her head, slather the blood all over her face and arms, and wrestle with the corpse until they were one. What the fuck? What is happening right now? Reason prevailed, though, so don't worry. She's gonna build a fire so she can cook this leopard and eat it. That's perfect. Definitely better. What? That is disgusting. I feel like I need 2 to 4 business days to process that. Oh my God. She's eating basically mostly still raw organs. Again, I understand that I am probably one of the least likely people to relate to this or understand this on any level, but what the I mean, truly, tell me if you are watching this and you're not vegan or vegetarian, does this sound appealing to you? She untied the Kripke's knives from their pulley and sawed into the cat's side until she had several fistfuls of meat. She dug further and found what looked like a heart and a liver. Organs are healthy, she'd once read. Eat those first. All this she skewered on a knife and placed directly into the flames. Let it burn. She didn't care. She wanted it messy, charcoal and blood and all. She couldn't wait long enough for the meat to cook through anyway. Once the smell hit her nose, her stomach screamed. She saw herself in her mind's eye with the same slavering glare the cat once turned on her. She seized the meat. It burned her fingers. She didn't notice. The liver she ate quickly. It came apart soft in her teeth. The heart she chewed for a long time, relishing how sore it made her gums. That is disgusting. Guarantee I would have still found this disgusting before I even went vegetarian, because I'm just going to move on, because what am I supposed to say? Where is this going? Okay, it feels like this book is saying that this experience of really messily and bloodily eating the corpse of a leopard is curing her eating disorder, which I have questions about. I mean, just as a caveat to counter whatever this messaging is supposed to be, I had an eating disorder and I was able to heal it and recover and stay recovered for over a decade while being vegan the whole time. You don't have to messily eat a corpse of any kind to heal your eating disorder, just putting that out there. But this is very strange. She decides to preserve the meat, which fine. In this context, there's very little. She's, had run out of her provisions basically, and there's no plant matter in hell. So, okay, fine. She's doing what she has to do to survive. And she's also a meat eater already. So, okay, she's preserving meat, but then the smell made her ravenous once more. She tore the meat into pieces and ate with gusto, licking fat from her burnt fingers. And then this paragraph is what's giving me pause. For the first time in a long while, she had a sense of her body. She felt its wants and pangs. She felt its strength. She turned her right hand over before her eyes and stared, astonished at its ridges and veins. So many little grinding pieces composed this heaving lump of a machine. And miracle of all miracles, it worked. And then basically, she also apparently has this thrumming roar deep in the pit of her stomach. At that moment, all Alice knew was that she desperately wanted to kill something. So also is this implying that she's somehow taken on the essence of the leopard by eating it or something? Is it like a special hell leopard? Is she going to turn into a leopard? I don't know what's happening right now. But I do not enjoy this framing of like, she was so weak and fragile until she ate the almost raw, bloody corpse of a carnivore. And now she's so strong and embodied. Like, that's weird. Okay. Sorry, that's weird. No, thank you. I truly have no idea what's happening right now. Things have really gone off the rails in the last couple pages. We went from, what is this book about? What's happening? What are we doing here? Is anything ever going to happen? To eating the organs of a recently viciously murdered leopard and then somehow taking on its strength in a possibly supernatural way. So things have escalated quickly. she's pleased that Gratis, the shade she met like 2 chapters ago, did something to amuse her, because that means they were still something to each other. Like, what are you to each other? You're strangers who had a couple conversations. What do you mean? You aren't anything to each other. You know each other now, kind of, except he obviously was lying to you about pretty much everything, and you don't actually know anything about him, and he doesn't really know anything about you either. What do you mean they were still something to one another as of 5 minutes ago? This would make so much more sense if this was Grimes. I mean, maybe it actually is Grimes and somehow he's hiding his appearance, or if it was Peter or something. But this random shade that you've known for 5 seconds? What? She finally just realized why she keeps pissing off the shades, the fact that she has the option to go back to life and they don't, and how frustrating it is that she doesn't give a shit about having that option, having that choice. She forgave him for it. She would be frustrated too if she'd wandered this wasteland trapped by 2 bad options and along pranced some idiot who declared it didn't all matter. Also, that seems, shouldn't it be it didn't matter at all, or it all didn't matter, not it didn't all matter? Anyway, my point is, ridiculous that it took to page 463 for her to understand why dead people might be mad that she doesn't care that she's still alive. She's also saying that this is the first time in a long time she felt her life mattered. She thought her life mattered last chapter when that shade jumped into the Lethe and she said, oh shit, suddenly I don't want to die. And I have a purpose in life. But now apparently it's been so long since she last thought her life mattered. Again, it's like we have a brand new discovery, something shifts, and then it immediately goes back as if it never happened. It's wiped off the board. And then the same discovery, the same change happens a couple chapters later, and we all are supposed to act like it's never happened before, and this is brand new and exciting. Just watch. This is going to be wiped off the board too. She's suddenly not going to have any will to live again in another 5 seconds, and then it'll go back and forth until this book is over. Because we can't actually take any steps forward. That would be ridiculous. Why would we ever want to make progress in the character development or in the plot in a book? She's now dismembering the remaining corpse of the leopard to use its skeleton as armor. Talks about spending nearly an hour digging the eyes and brains out with her fingers because she wanted to use the skull as a helmet, but unfortunately she couldn't fit her gigantic brain into the head of the leopard. After all that, she has turned what's left of the leopard, which is basically just the skull, into a shrine, which she's bowed to because she feels the cat deserved some of her gratitude. It's like, I think the cat deserves all your gratitude because you watched it get murdered, didn't do anything to help it. Maybe you couldn't have, but still. And then you ate it and turned it into armor. Pretty sure you owe the leopard all of your gratitude for literally giving its life and everything that it was to serve your needs, you know? But okay. This is the first time in a while that anyone had expressed concern over her demise. Peter literally sacrificed his life to save you because he didn't want you to die. That happened like 10 minutes ago. Okay, maybe a couple days ago, but it hasn't been that long. What do you mean? Why does she consider her time with Gratis very special? I don't understand why she feels like they have this deep bond after spending perhaps a few hours together at most. Maybe a day or two. Is she that starved for human affection? Maybe. Don't understand how they're supposed to be more than strangers, basically, though. Friendly strangers, I suppose. But they're still not even really acquaintances. Okay, sorry, it will never not be funny to me that she snorted chalk and that's given her, like, superpowers, basically. Her perception of time has changed. Basically, time has slowed down around her, so she's way faster than everyone else and can take them all out because she snorted chalk. She's now having visions of cannibalism. Is hell finally getting to her? This is going in a direction that I had not anticipated. If she actually cannibalizes the Kripkes, that will certainly be a surprise. Just to add to the plethora of things Alice has thought that make her hard to relate to and root for, she had the impulse to smack a small child across the face. Feels like you didn't have to share that, but you did. And now we know. So that's great. So she just used the stitched together corpse that she was going to move Grimes' soul into to capture Nick. Does that mean that she can't use it for Grimes anymore? I mean, she hasn't talked about Grimes in a minute. I guess she's decided she doesn't care anymore, which is wild because that was the whole premise of this book, but fine. But now she definitely can't bring Grimes back, I don't think, right? I mean, who knows? Maybe it's all made up, right? Maybe it's possible to use it more than once, but it seems to me like she's just used up her only way to get Grimes back, if she still cared about that. She seems to be back to not caring about being alive and being fine and totally accepting of death and her existence ending once again. What did I tell you? I knew we were going to go back to that. We couldn't stay wanting to live for more than 5 seconds, which again would be fine, except that it's very frustrating as a reader to go back and forth constantly and never make any progress. I do like this passage about memory and her talking about how now, because she had the special never forget anything tattoo from Grimes, and that dissolved first, it kind of protected her from losing every single one of her memories. She just lost stuff here and there, and she lost the stuff that she artificially learned because of her tattoo. But I like this. Alice prodded her memory. She knew that she was not confused about where she was or how she had gotten here. But beyond that, she really couldn't say. There were patches that she had and patches she knew were gone, and even more patches whose loss she didn't know to register at all. For a moment, she found this prospect terrifying. That memory was not a well-kept library, but rather a moth-eaten basement with dim, flickering lights. But remembered then that this was just how everyone lived all the time, how she herself had lived most of her life. You groped around in the dark, you settled for stories, not recordings. You made do with the bits you had and tried your best to fill in the rest. Not all, she said, but I've got enough. I do like that. As someone with a terrible memory, that's extremely relatable. I forget so much all the time, and I've just had to accept that that is my experience, and that my memory is moth-eaten, and to be appreciative of what is left, you know? Okay, we've also had the reveal where Elsbeth tells Alice that Peter was in love with her, which she apparently still hadn't figured out. And then she says, but I didn't know. And that can't be. And then, but he never said. I wish she just said. And then Elspeth says, magicians, fools, all of us. And it's like, seriously, still? We're still saying that the fact that we're magicians means that we just won't ever communicate. We don't have to say anything. And that's the explanation for this very common romance book trope of someone being in love with someone for ages and just never saying anything. It's such a played out trope, and it's so annoying. Especially because we as the readers know very clearly, very obviously, that one of them or both of them are in love with each other, and then they just won't talk about it or admit it, and they can't see it for the whole time, which like sometimes is relatable, I guess. Just saying, this was promoted on a certain level as a romance. Not only does it seem like, I mean, maybe he's going to come back, but right now Peter is dead. So it's a romance where one of the two love interests is dead. But also, it took till page 503 for Alice to learn that Peter was in love with her. How is that a romance? I'm pretty sure that's not how romances work. I don't read a lot of romance, but I feel, I have an inkling that that's not how they function, you know? Oh. She found the true contradiction, as in she found a flower growing in hell, somehow, impossibly. And because they have this, they can basically create a magic spell that could do literally anything because they have this impossible thing to put on the other side of the proof. So obviously she's going to choose to bring Peter back with it, right? It seems like either she's going to offer to bring Elspeth back to life and Elspeth's going to turn it down and say, no, you should bring Peter back and go back together because you're in love. Or she's going to tell Elspeth, or she's going to tell Elspeth she's going to bring her back and then trick her somehow and actually use it to bring Peter back. We'll find out. It feels very convenient for Elspeth to find the true contradiction and then just to give it to Alice because she's just decided now that she no longer wants to get back to living. Now that she can, she just wants to be done. She just wants to cross the river. And she doesn't even know how to do that or how long it's going to take her to do that. But she's decided now that she has the chance to do what she's wanted to do this whole time that she actually doesn't care anymore. Just feels very convenient, okay? Extremely convenient, especially because she has no reason to like Alice or want to help Alice, other than the fact that Alice also went through the same kind of abuse from Grimes that she did. And maybe that's the impetus, but she's not sharing it. She's just saying, sometimes people just give you things and you should just take them. It's like, well, or you could explain why you're giving away this thing you've been searching for so long to this person who tried to betray you, but... Really? The pizza anus is back? I haven't even read that part yet. My eye just drifted to it on the page. Serious? Why? It's not funny. Stop trying to make the penis anus, the penis anus. Stop trying to make the pizza anus happen. It's not going to happen, okay? Just leave it alone. Stop. Oh, hello. You gonna sit with me? Huh? Huh? Hi, honey. You gonna lie down? I feel like that would be easier to balance if you lie down. Don't you think? Shockingly, now I have cat hair all over my face. Wonder how that happened. I'm not gonna lie, it's kind of annoying that she finds Professor Grimes and that she just tells King Yama that she was looking for Grimes and he snaps him into existence and now he's there. That feels a little easy and convenient this long before the end. This is where we're at. Now we found Professor Grimes, found him. Okay. And then he praises her and she's glowing again, and such praise. She could never forget how good his praise felt, like the whole sun turned upon her. She was reminded again that she mattered. She was like a desperately convoluted proof running down two sides of the paper, lines dwindling to cramped scribbles on the margins until magically it came out valid. Her heart hammered very fast in her chest, and a hot, heady wash passed through her mind before she could sort her thoughts out and speak. Still? She's never gonna change. So now Professor Grimes is offering her discovering all the secrets of hell together and then going back together someday and becoming world famous magicians because they discovered all the secrets of hell. And she doesn't want to because she doesn't want to die. Apparently, now she doesn't want to die. I want to be alive, she thought. I just want to sit on the banks of the Cam and kick my ankles over the water and eat a warm, sticky bun. I want to lick sugar off my fingers and feel the sun warm my skin. That is what I want. Is it though? Is it what you want? Because you've changed your mind every other page for this entire book. How do I know that in 2 pages you're not going to say, actually, life is not worth living and I want to be dead now? Because I feel like that has been the prevailing opinion for most of this book. And what is the impetus for her to change her mind yet again? She seems to change her mind about a very important issue of whether she wants to be alive or not. Very willy-nilly. She's still defending him. She's still making excuses for him. It will literally never end. 523 pages and she's learned nothing. She's still believing him and saying that he never lied. Absolutely baffling. What are you talking about? Okay, never mind. We're 1 page later and she's finally seen through him. Somehow, apparently, eventually, after 524 pages. But if he'd only conquered hell and been more great, she would have followed him still, apparently. So that's a bit disappointing. But she's finally seen that he is, in fact, a cruel, weak, crappy man and has gotten over her obsession, apparently, now, in an instant. So that's a thing, I guess. So glad we finally made some progress here. Once again, this is how far through we are. This is what's left. This is what we've read. She's finally not under the veil of his control. His glamour is dissipating after all this time. She brought Peter Murdoch back. I guess she did the thing, like she used his pentagram that he was going to trade himself for Grimes, and she's trading him for Grimes. But my question is, how does that work if his soul was completely wiped out? That was the whole thing, that if you were not dead, but you were in hell, but you got killed in hell, that you completely winked out of existence. So how is his soul even stored somewhere to come back? Are they going to tell us in the last chapter? Because I have questions about how this is possible. Okay, not only are we getting, maybe not slow motion, but them like slowly ramping up to run across the space to each other, to hug each other, which feels very cliche. But also we get a little passage about how thin Peter is as well, including specifics of how many times she can wrap her arms around his waist, which is just like, okay, I get it. Everyone is very thin in this book. Thanks for sharing. How is this relevant to the story? Page 532, they finally kiss. What a romance. I am pretty sentimental and a big romantic, okay? But this was so saccharine, it's wild. But why? He stopped himself, then rephrased. But then you came for nothing. Not nothing. She traced her thumb down his cheeks. What a marvel, she thought. His face, his jaw, the prickly stubble where his hairline meets his temple. God carved this boy. I guess there's just one God now? I don't know. We still don't know. Not nothing. I gained everything. Oh, Alice. It would be really funny if her bargaining with King Yama was not specific enough and they didn't actually get what they wanted, especially because she says a trip back up top or something very vague like that. What does she say? Journey back up top, for one. Oh shit. And I just reread it. I was like, okay, first of all, that's not very specific, so he could easily not send them both back. But she also says journey back up top, for one, as in, for one, like the first in my list, but also could be interpreted as journey back up top for one, for only one of the two of them. And he says, for one, question mark. And then she goes, for another, we want our lifespans back. But she doesn't clarify that she meant for two, as in for both of them. So he's definitely only going to send one of them back up. Mark my words. Come on, Alice. I thought you were smart. This is ridiculous. Oh my God. If this is true and this is how it ends, then I understand why people are so pissed off, because that's really fucking annoying that she would make a mistake like that. Come on. You're making a bargain with the Lord of Hell and you're not very specific with your wording. I feel like I'll be equally annoyed if that ends up being nothing and they both get to go back, even though she messed up her negotiations so bad. Wait, that actually didn't matter? They both got to leave? Seriously? The fact that she said trip back up top for one didn't fuck this up? They were both sent up? Well, that's kind of annoying. Okay, Alice climbed up, Peter close behind her, and together they emerged to re-behold the stars. The end. Okay. That felt really pointless. Okay, I need to process for a second. Really? She didn't mess up that negotiation? That felt very obvious to me. That seems kind of silly that worked. Okay, yeah, I need to think about this for a sec. I'm gonna let that percolate. I'll be back. Okay, and the time it took me to make a snack, it got pretty dark out, so I apologize for the lighting change. It actually hasn't been that long, though. It's maybe been half an hour or something. But anyway, okay, spoilery thoughts on this entire book. I'm trying to order my thoughts because I don't want the non-spoiler section to just be a repeat of this, but more vague, you know? So I'm trying to specifically talk about the things that are spoilery, and then the non-spoiler section is in addition to these thoughts, you know, instead of just repeating myself. But basically, I guess I'll focus on the ending because I found that ending so anticlimactic. Not only did we go through this whole journey where the whole point is that she can't imagine a life without Grimes because she can't imagine a life without her academic success and the respect and the job she's going to get, the prestige of being a Grimes student. I get that the idea is that she's now gotten over that she's grown and changed and realized she doesn't need him. But she didn't really, though. Like, we didn't watch her grow and change. She was one note about Grimes, completely being in denial, completely ignoring the bad things he'd done and justifying them and making excuses for him and glorifying him until like 3 pages from the end. And then she's faced with Grimes as a shade, and just suddenly it hits her out of nowhere that actually he's the worst, and actually, no, she's done. She doesn't need him anymore. And we don't watch that happen. It's 530 something pages, and we don't actually get to see that shift happen. It just happens in an instant, and we get no interiority on that. She makes that decision and that's it. And also, I get that she made the decision before she knew for sure that she could get Peter back. But the fact that she basically trades one man for another, that she decides that she actually doesn't care as much about academia and her male advisor because she can have her male love interest, and that is even better, actually, feels like less of a win than I think it's supposed to be. It just feels like she is incapable of choosing herself, which is another thing. I can't believe that this has been marketed at all as a romance. This is not a romance at all. It's not that it's not romantic or that they don't have chemistry or that it couldn't have been a romance, because as much as I don't like either of them, I do think that they are probably a match made in heaven or hell, as it were, and that they do have some chemistry and it probably could work, but we don't see any of that. We see them kiss once, right at the end. And I guess they're in love now, so that's great, but we didn't actually watch it. Again, we didn't see it happen. We watched them be in proximity to each other, not talking about their feelings for, I don't know, it was like 400 pages or something till Peter sacrificed himself for her, and then they were not together for another 100 pages or so, and then she brings him back, and 3 pages later, the book is over, and they're in love, I guess. And they're holding hands, so all is well with the world. But that's not a romance, and I don't know why it's being marketed that way. I can't imagine anyone who's gonna go into this for the romance academic rivals to lovers thing is going to be satisfied by this romantic subplot, because it's really non-existent. I also cannot believe that she fucked up her deal with the devil, deal with King Yama, so much by saying, "Journey back up top," said Alice, "for one." For one? And then they're both allowed to go back? That feels like such an oversight, and I think I would have been pissed if she fucked it up by being that stupid, but I'm even more pissed that the book pretends that that never happened and doesn't catch her out on that. Like, come on. You're telling me that someone who lords over hell isn't gonna have a great time holding you to your exact word and fucking you up? Like, King Yama doesn't care that you get your happy ending together. It literally does not matter to him whatsoever. Cannot believe that that was allowed to just go by like nothing. Also, Alice has the opportunity to essentially negotiate for anything from the king of the underworld and gets half their lifespans back. It gets them both back on Earth. But she also could have tried asking for more things, including trying to maybe somehow address or fix systemic misogyny in academia, but she does not try or care. She doesn't seem to ever think about anyone other than herself. She is very self-focused and selfish, and as long as she gets back on Earth and gets more of her life back, and Peter is there because she's decided that she wants to have him, and it's, again, very self-focused, and Grimes is dead, so clearly her life is going to be better now, so who cares about all the other women who are still experiencing objectification and sexual assault and sexual harassment and misogyny in academia? I don't think she cares. And she doesn't even try to bargain for anything to get better. It's one thing to write an unlikable character for a purpose, and I guess the purpose of her being so self-obsessed and thinking that she's the greatest academic to have ever existed and that she's above systemic misogyny because she is just so exceptional is meant to reinforce the themes and the exploration of mostly sexism in academia and just the hellishness of academia in general and its exploitative nature. But I don't feel that the book really did examine that. You know, it showed us that it is that way, but then nothing happened with that. She just continues presumably to be anti-feminist. She presumably continues to see herself as the exception. The whole ending where she's finally deciding to take down Grimes, she just feels so satisfied that she's outwitted him and that she's proving she's smarter than him after all. And it doesn't feel like she really learned anything through this whole journey other than maybe to believe in herself, which is great and all, but she always seemed to have this delusional belief in herself, regardless of what was thrown at her. And maybe now it's less delusional and more rooted in true self-esteem, which is great, I guess. But Peter is a nothing burger. He is a very boring character. He has Crohn's disease, chronic illness, but it comes up in a single chapter where we get a flashback for basically his whole life and learn that about him, and then he's immediately killed off. So, okay, it doesn't really tie into the story other than at the very end when she hugs him for the first time, realizing just how thin he is, presumably because of his illness. But that just felt like a weird fetishizing tie-in to every other time in this book that thinness and starvation was fetishized. And that's another thing that was never addressed. She never examined why she forced herself to become so thin and why she was so obsessed with restricting her food and glorifying starvation to look more like Grimes' type, and also to live up to his expectation that she eschew physical needs so that she can focus entirely on achievements of the mind. And even in realizing she doesn't need him and vanquishing him, it all happens so quickly that she never has that realization. She never puts those pieces together, and the book itself never grapples with or examines the way that it is glorifying an eating disorder the entire time. I guess there's the scene where she cuts up a fresh corpse of a leopard and eats it and talks about feeling ravenous and feeling full and strong for the first time. And again, if that's meant to be some sort of a symbolic healing from her eating disorder, it did not land for me, and it did not make up for the number of times that it felt like her disordered eating and starvation and self-harm and mental illness was being glorified. Also, it ties in with, like I said earlier, the grooming and the coercive control and the power imbalance between her and her professor, which again is never really addressed, and she's able to break from his control extremely suddenly, because even in the last chapter that Grimes is alive, she falls for his praise and feels herself falling back into regular patterns with him before snapping out of it and destroying his soul. But again, we don't see how that happens. She's waffling back and forth and not willing to examine his abuse and mistreatment of her and exploitation of her and grooming of her for hundreds of pages, and then just in a moment, she's broken out of it and she's better now. But also, we're not going to talk about it or think about it or have any time to reckon with that whatsoever. We don't even get a single conversation between Peter and Alice about how they feel now with him being properly gone. Like, they have a quick back and forth of, well, what do we do now? And they're like, well, the power of love. Who cares? Who needs jobs? Who needs academia? And it's like, you do. You said you do. Your whole life is different now. You don't care, I guess, but we don't get to see that shift. We don't get to watch it happen. We don't get to experience it with them. And that to me doesn't feel like it's a character driven story, or that the story is focused on their growth and change as characters on their arc, because it isn't an arc. It's a flat plane, just like hell, a featureless void. And then suddenly they hop over here and they've made progress, but it's all inside their own head, and we didn't get to witness it, and we don't get to hear about it, and we don't get to hear how they feel about it. It's just done now. And I also wasn't a fan of how it handled suicidality, both for herself and her constant waffling back and forth between wanting to live and wanting to die, every time being treated as this great revelation. And now she's changed, and now this is her new view on life, and she's found her purpose, or she's completely let go of her purpose. And then 2 seconds later, she's flipped back the other way, and it felt very untethered, as if Kuang just decided every time she was writing a sentence whether it was useful for Alice to be suicidal or not in that moment, and just randomly picked one, or maybe flipped a coin, and that it wasn't actually tied to her growth and what she was experiencing and her own perspective on life. And I have no reason to believe that she's going to continue to have a will to live moving forward, because there seemed to be no rhyme or reason to her finding and losing her will to live throughout this entire book. It was very flippantly handled and constantly changing with no rhyme or reason. Our understanding is that if you are alive, but in hell, if you're killed in hell, your soul is obliterated. You're just gone. There's no coming back from that. So apparently that wasn't true. I guess it's never addressed. He can just come back now. Where was his soul this whole time? Don't know. Thought he was completely eviscerated, that his soul was untethered, untangled, and then poofed out of existence, but I guess not. And the fact that she's suffering because of the tattoo of the pentagram that Professor Grimes gave her, and that it's become a curse to have a photographic memory and to remember every single moment of her life and everything she's ever seen and heard and done. But it turns out incredibly convenient because she is soaked with the water of the Lethe, and instead of forgetting everything about herself and losing her personhood, she just loses the tattoo and forgets all the superfluous information, but still remembers who she is, remembers her whole life with Peter, I guess, still remembers how to do magic, presumably is just totally fine. And it feels very, very convenient for it to not only be this special protection from the Lethe, but also that she would forget all of this stuff, that she would feel that she's forgetting additional things, but for it to only be things that don't actually matter in the grand scheme of things, and for her not to lose any actual relevant information that would impact her life in any measurable way. But I think that's it for spoilers, honestly. I thought maybe at one point that I might finish it and just go on an extensive rant, but honestly, I feel just a little bit drained and tired. It made me tired. I'm very frustrated by how this book went, to be honest. And there are things about it that I liked, but it just wasn't enough to make up for everything else, you know? But I'm going to move on to my final non-spoilery thoughts for Katabasis. I haven't been holding it this whole time because it's heavy, but I guess I'll hold it now. This was a very frustrating read for me. There are a lot of things about this that I found very irritating. There are things I like about it. Okay, so let me try to order my thoughts. First of all, you do not need to do extensive reading to prepare for this. You don't have to read anything other than this book to understand this book. There are references to things, but they're always explained if they're actually relevant to what's going to happen. And if they're not relevant and it's just a name drop, then it doesn't actually impact the book whatsoever. Sure, if you know who each of those people are and know their entire backstories, you might get a little bit of extra context, or there might be a bit of a little joke in there, but largely it doesn't matter. It's adding an extra layer of context, but you do not need to read a whole long reading list for context for this. You do not have to look up every reference to understand this. You will be fine. It's really not that complex. It is not written like, nor does it read like a textbook. There are references to historical figures, academics, theories. There are times where they're working through logical puzzles or talking about how the magic works or how a paradox works or talking about math. But that's part of the magic system. And it, again, doesn't read like a textbook. It just reads like the kind of technobabble that comes along with any magic system. Most fantasy that has a proper magic system is going to have that kind of magical technobabble. And that's pretty normal for fantasy. So I'm kind of surprised that people are framing it that way. I really didn't feel that it was overly academic or complex, or that there were too many references, or that it was confusing, or that it was written like a textbook. That being said, I did not particularly like the prose here or the writing structure in general. I felt that the pacing was glacially slow. Everything was just this stilted, jittering engine that won't start. And I just felt like we were trapped in place for the entire book, with things sort of floating by at a leisurely pace and nothing really landing and nothing really happening. I don't feel that there was really a strong point of view. I feel like this book wanted me to know that academia is hard and very sexist. And that's fair, I guess. But I did already know that. And, what else are you trying to say with that? Anything? And I found not only the writing on a sentence level quite repetitive, but in a larger context, looking at the ideas and the symbols and the way the themes were being addressed and the character development, all of those things were incredibly repetitive and very stagnant. It felt like not only with the plot, but also with the character development and the thematic explorations, that we would take one step forward and two steps back every single chapter. We never made any real progress. We never really got anywhere or went anywhere. And maybe that would be cool if it felt like that was a larger commentary or part of a metaphor about being trapped in hell and being on a treadmill and never getting off and being stuck in your own self-destruction and delusion and never growing or changing or learning anything. But I didn't feel like that was what we were getting. It just felt like the book didn't have direction and there was not really any purpose for it to exist. Certainly not for it to be 500 and however many pages. How many pages is it again? 541 pages. There wasn't enough content here for it to be that long. Not only was there not enough plot, because the plot is go to hell, wander around a little more, the end. It's about it. But also, I talked about it more in depth in the spoiler section, of course, but the character development is pretty much non-existent. I said, and I stand by, the fact that our protagonist Alice has the character arc of a single point on a graph. And maybe at the very end, in the last chapter, she does a little hop over here, and that's it. There is no character arc for her. There's no growth and change other than a very sudden shift of perspective right at the end. Like I talked about, the taking one step forward and then two back. You get the same with Alice's character development, where she will presumably seemingly take a step forward, realize something, recognize something, maybe start to change or grow. And then the next chapter, she's right back to where she started, if not regressed even further. And that just happens over and over and over and over and over again. And it was deeply frustrating to read about a character who is not only incredibly unlikable, but also never grows or changes or does anything of note. Very frustrating. Peter didn't do anything, was kind of useless. To be honest, he didn't really need to be in the story. This is not a romance. The fact that it's being marketed as a romance is wild. For spoiler reasons, I can't say much about how this goes and how their romance goes, but it goes in the direction of nothing happening. This isn't a romance. There is very little romantic content. I don't want to spoil anything, but if you go into this for the romance, you are going to be sorely disappointed because the romance does not exist. I think the most you could say is that this gestures at a possible future romance, but you don't see any of it happen on the page. And that's kind of my biggest qualm with this in general. I feel like any of the actual development doesn't happen on page. It's just implied. The characters in general were pretty one note, from our protagonist to our love interest to the villains. Also very cartoonish and not really allowed to be complex and human at any point. Hell is a college campus and everyone who is there is an academic, but it's never really addressed whether it's just a college campus for everyone, even non-academics go to a college campus of hell, or if only academics go to this version of hell and there are multiple versions, or if it just looks different to different people, they're all experiencing their own version of hell. That's never talked about. They don't seem to really run into anyone who isn't an academic, so it either implies that only academics go to hell, which is kind of wild, or that this is its own version of hell, but it's also strange that that's never thought about or addressed or talked about whatsoever. I did feel like the world building was a little lackluster in that we are assuming that every fictional account of hell is real and literal and historical, but we're also assuming that every religion's take on hell is real simultaneously, and that all the deities and all the demons and all the hellish things exist. But then it's never taken to its logical conclusion of, okay, then if all the hell stories are real, then are all the heaven stories real? Are all religions real? Are all religious figures real? Are all the gods existing simultaneously at once? Are they all one person being called by different names, by different people, different religions, different places in the world? Or is this a multi-theistic situation where they're all chilling together? Does everyone go to hell? Do only some people go to hell? Who decides? We don't really ever get into any of that, and I found that a bit frustrating and wanted more from that, because I did find it somewhat interesting, this take on hell, but it just felt like everything was sort of sketched in, but not fully rendered in color. Everything was an idea, but not fleshed out. You know, this also felt very under edited to me. I pointed out some of the issues at the beginning, and I came across some more even right at the end of the book. Sentences that felt very clunky and strange, some wording that didn't seem to make much sense or felt like it was a mistake that was left unaddressed and unedited. There were just a lot of those little moments that felt like they should have been caught by an editor at some point in the process. And I also feel a little bit, I talked about this in the spoiler section, so I'll try not to repeat myself too much for the people who will have watched that, but I wanted to bring that up for anyone who hasn't read this yet and is watching this out of curiosity for the non-spoiler thoughts. I'm not sure what the point of this book was. I think if it was meant to be Alice's story and her growth and changing, then it was a failure for me personally, because I didn't feel that we got to see any of that growth or change. If it's meant to be an examination of its themes primarily, which is how I would classify something like Babel, I also don't think that it was particularly effective, because the themes are academia is bad for a bunch of reasons. Exploitative, abusive, sexist, basically hell on earth. Then that's it. We're told that in the first chapter, and that's reiterated throughout, but we never really go anywhere with it. We never explore the systemic issues at length. We never dive deeper. We never examine the larger systemic issues at play that then leak into academia. We never talk about what the motivations are, what the inspirations are for academics to continue to uphold these systems past surface level quips and conversations here and there. So much of this is about the experience of being a woman in academia and dealing with the misogyny and objectification and sexualization and fetishization and being dismissed and ignored and undervalued. And it never goes anywhere. We're just told that that's the case and shown that that's the case over and over and over again. And Alice, who is our view into this world, both sees that that's the case, but deludes herself out of truly believing it and accepting it, because she refuses to see herself as anything other than an exception to the rule, and exceptional to the point where she cannot be touched by the misogyny of academia. And even when it does touch her and impact her deeply, she deludes herself out of dealing with it or facing it head on. And that never goes anywhere. That never changes. So it just feels like this book could have been a blog post about how academia is sexist. And we would all go, oh yeah, it really is. We should do something about that. I'm not sure how examining it through this lens of a fantasy journey through hell actually enhances or deepens our understanding of this issue whatsoever. And that's something that in Babel, while I had my issues with Babel that I've talked about before in this channel, it's not my favorite book ever. There are things about the execution that didn't work for me. I felt that it at least examined its themes. It at least was very committed to the exploration of its themes. In this case, I just feel like the author wasn't really saying anything other than there is sexism in academia, which, yes, agreed. But then what? I don't feel that there was enough of a clear direction and purpose, and I feel like my time was a bit wasted because there was so much spinning of wheels and so little progression in any area of the story. There was so much repetition and so little development and so little plot and so little examining of the themes past the surface level that I just started to check out and started to wonder, why am I putting in so much of my time and effort to reading this? And if it's meant to just be entertaining, unfortunately, it failed on that front for me personally, because it was so stagnant and so little happened in terms of the plot, and there was so little character development. There was really nothing for me to chew on. It felt very flimsy, despite how massive this is. It's not a flimsy book, but it felt that way. I feel like I had an appetizer instead of a full meal, you know? I also don't want to get into too many details for possible spoiler reasons, and I did go into more depth in the spoiler wrap-up, but I did not appreciate how this book approached a couple different ideas. I didn't like how it dealt with suicidality, and I also very, very, very much did not appreciate how it handled Alice and her eating disorder. Her eating disorder is prominent. It comes up again and again, and it's talked about in very glorifying language that reminds me of blogs I should not have had access to in the 2000s. 2000s. It never examines its own glorification of starvation in a way that is honestly concerning to me. And it's tied with further abuse, and that's also never examined. The only time that you could maybe say that there was some sort of growth or change in terms of the eating disorder was a very disturbing scene, to be honest, and also sends a strange message, in my opinion. And I just would caution anyone who is thinking about reading this, if you have ever dealt with a restrictive eating disorder, I would not recommend, because the way that this talks about it, I found deeply triggering, and I'm a decade into recovery. I would not recommend it for that reason. There's also a lot of animal cruelty and death that was quite upsetting to read, so keep that in mind as well. If that's something you're sensitive to, of course, I'll have all the content warnings I noticed in the book card as well. But I also don't understand why the choice was made to set it in the 80s. That had no relevance to this book whatsoever. It could have been set any time and place, to be honest, and it would have been the same story. It being set in the 80s didn't matter. Alice didn't learn that she was wrong about misogyny and feminism, or if she did learn it, she never said it. We never got to see that. I just come to the end of this and I feel very blah. I feel like this had potential and there were little aspects here and there that I liked about it, but that it really dropped the ball and that it didn't really do anything or go anywhere or say anything of note. And that kind of sucks, because I feel like if you're going to write 540 pages of a novel, you might as well say something in those 540 pages. And other than saying that Alice is very selfish and she only wants what's best for her and that sexism in academia is bad, could have been an email, at this point. So that's Katabasis. Sorry, I really wanted to like this. I have tried so hard to get on the hype train with everyone else on the planet, it seems, who is obsessed with R.F. Kuang. I really want to love her work, and as it stands right now, Babel is my favorite of her books, but still definitely was not a perfect book for me. This was less focused, less developed, less polished for me than Babel, and I definitely struggled significantly more with the pacing and the characters and the world building and the way the themes were examined. And honestly, even the magic system was maybe one of the few things that I liked about this, but I still preferred the magic system in Babel. I thought it was more unique and interesting. I'm so sorry. Please don't hate me, but I think I'm coming in at 2 stars for this right now, which for me usually is like, this was not for me. I didn't enjoy it, or I had significant issues with it. And that's kind of where we're at with this. It just really let me down. And that sucks, because it's a really cool premise. And there were things about it that I really liked, but it just, no. As much as this was a frustrating read and unfortunately not a new favorite as I had hoped initially, I did enjoy getting to share my thoughts and getting to document my experience with the book for all of you. So I hope you did too. If you liked this video, give it a like. Subscribe if you haven't already. If you watched this whole video, then we're probably meant to be internet friends. So feel free to subscribe. You can join me on my Patreon if you want more content, more time with me, if you want to join the book club, the buddy read, etc. And I'm gonna get going. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you really soon in my next one. Bye, friends.